What gave the ancients the idea of watching the night sky, of creating lunar calendars and zodiacs that mark the passage of the moon through the starry sky? What strange event occurred in our history that had every culture abandoning their lunar models and adopting solar calendars and developing a solar zodiac based off the older lunar models? And do we know what year this actually happened? All of these questions are answered in this presentation, citing the most qualified men of their field. The origin of the solar zodiac, it is incredible. And knowing these facts completely collapses many false historical models accepted by the masses. So this video here, we're going to be addressing something that I haven't seen addressed anywhere else. Where in the hell did Babylonian, which was the first and the oldest based off the Sumerian antecedents, where in the hell did they even get the idea that watching the sky was something detrimental? What I'm saying is that an artifact that we've had in our possession for 140 years, that was ignored for over 125 years. It's just one of the 20,000 tablets that was found in one of the underground libraries in Assyria. But it holds the key not only to understanding Babylonian astronomy, but the very origin of Babylonian astronomy and the lunar calendar, which later became a lunar zodiac, which later became a solar zodiac. The very origin is explained in this tablet. So this is some very compelling material. You've seen pictures of it. It's pretty damn detailed. It's really detailed. Our knowledge of Babylonian astronomy, it derives in large part from two tablets from 687 BC called MUL.APIN. I'm going to show, you're going to see how this is spelled here in a minute, but it's MUL period APIN, all capital letters. Though the data on the tablets is from 1280 to 687 BC. The MUL.APIN tablet doesn't look anything like this. Let me find it. I'm gonna have to show, it's in another file. The MUL.APIN tablet is like a pillar. It's big, squarish, or rectangular. However, MUL.APIN is on this tablet as well. So the Babylonians made no mention of a zodiac at this time and needed only the lunar calendar. I'm going to repeat that. There's a lot of people that don't want to come to terms with this. But lunar calendars of the ancient world were popular, and there were several different renditions. So they were all 12 house calendars. However, some civilizations realized that adding a 13th lunar mansion every 4 years corrected an intercalary problem. Not all civilizations did it, though. There was never a 13-month calendar anywhere. A 13th moon was inserted every few years to make the calendar balance out with the seasons. So it's also of epic importance to understand these 12 house lunar calendars were not lunar zodiacs. The zodiac concept didn't even come till much later. So this is the research of Rupert Gleadow on the origin of the zodiac. The man spent 40 years on his PhD dissertation giving us the history of the zodiac. MUL.APIN tablets are preserved in the British Museum. This is tablet 86378, the MUL.APIN. There's several pictures of the. Here's a good one. This is a really good one right here. So MUL is a Sumerian determinative and a logogram for all types of visible phenomena in the sky, in the heavens. And now MUL can describe constellations, parts of constellations, super constellations, single star asterisms, named stars, but also phenomena such as comets, meteors, even on occasion, luminous phenomena in the sky. They're all classified under the word MUL. A full list of zodiacal constellations appears for the first time in MUL.APIN and reads, "The stars who stand in the path of the moon, through whose region the moon during a month passes repeatedly and keeps touching." So here's a close-up of it. This is the tablet that is the subject matter of this video. It's not the MUL.APIN tablets from about 1300 to 687 BC. That tablet is right here. This is tablet 1 of the MUL.APIN. So this tablet literally starts off with MUL.APIN. That's the beginning of the tablet. And then it lists the stars who stand in the path of the moon, through whose region the moon during a month passes repeatedly and keeps touching. For those who want to know, the date of this tablet describes Babylonian astronomy from about 1300 BC to 687 BC. And during this entire period, the Babylonians had an 18-month lunar calendar. So here are the 18 Babylonian constellations of the lunar calendar in the order they appear. The Pleiades, you know them as the Seven Sisters. Hyades, Orion, Perseus, Auriga, Gemini, Praesepe, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, the southern fish, the northern fish, Aries. Now, most of these are very familiar to you. Unfortunately, you have just been given the familiar names. You've been given the familiar concepts. This was also published by Rupert Gleadow in The Origin of the Zodiac. However, we have another list I'm going to show you of their proper Babylonian counterparts, and you're going to see that Aries through Pisces Zodiac wasn't really known to the Babylonians, and the Babylonians are the originators of the Zodiac. So the calendar of 18 constellations was solely lunar. There was no ram known to the ancient Babylonian astronomy. Aries, the ram, was not known. Aries was something else. So instead of a bull, it had a spear. The constellation was called the spear instead of Taurus, the bull. Virgo wasn't a virgin, but the constellation plant growth. This is from Morris Jastrow, Aspects of Religious Belief and Practice in Babylonian Assyria. Now, Rupert Gleadow, who's citing all these other academics in The Origin of the Zodiac, wrote that the constellation Leo, the lion, wasn't even known to the ancient Babylonians. They called it the Great Dog. The earliest references to the Bull of Heaven, the Great Twins, the Scales, and the Scorpion as constellations in Babylonia are found in the astrolabes about 1100 BC, which also mention many other constellations that are not associated to the modern zodiac. The heliacal rising of the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, began the Babylonian year. The Seven Sisters associated later very closely in the sky to a constellation called the Plough. This is the subject matter of this video. The Plough is literally called Apin. This is the Plough constellation is MUL.APIN. It is this plow constellation from which we get the term MUL.APIN for Babylonian astronomy. You have to understand, the whole of Babylonian astronomy and astrology to the Babylonians was all summed up in the term MUL.APIN. MUL.APIN refers to the plow constellation. This is where things get really interesting. The astronomy was entirely stellar and lunar. It involved records of the risings of stars and the constellations in terms of a year of 12 months, each month 30 days long. During this 12 months were distributed 18 constellations. The MUL.APIN only knows a 360-day year. The 17 and sometimes 18 intercalary signs of the celestial sphere were divided into 12 parts. They had not yet developed a 12 constellation zodiac. This is History of the Zodiac by Robert Powell, page 109. This 687 BC, what you're looking at on the screen right now, this 687 BC date for the MUL.APIN astronomy tablets marks the beginning of a transitional period when Babylonian astronomers had now began formulating a solar calendar based out of the older lunar models. Why? It's not the subject matter of this video, but we know what happened in 713 BC. We know the year changed from 360 days to 365.25. We know Immanuel Velikovsky, who is ignored by Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock and all these others who want to push a younger Dryas cataclysm. They have to ignore everything that Immanuel Velikovsky brought to the table. We already know what happened. All of a sudden, the sun is extremely important after this event. Babylon had no interest in measuring the sun for anything until after 713 BC, and they didn't finish formalizing their astronomy until 687 BC. It's like a 26-year difference. It means 26 years after the event. So I'm going to share on my screen now the constellations as they were known to Babylon before India, before Egypt. Egypt was still practicing the 36 decans. They didn't have anything comparable to a 12 house solar zodiac. Nobody did at this time. Here's the Babylonians were the first, and this is the actual list of constellations in MUL.APIN. I'm going to show it on the screen. It's very intriguing because it shows you just may not be the sign you thought you were. What you know of as Aries to the Babylonians, who are the originator of the lunar and zodiacal astronomy. Aries was the hired man. In some areas like Assyria or Elam, Aries was also the sheep. Taurus was actually called the stars, and it's a reference to anytime in ancient Babylonia somebody says, "Oh man, the stars, they went down," or hey, we need to get ready for our festival. The stars are coming up tomorrow. They're talking about the Pleiades system, the seven sisters, because ancient Babylonian astronomy was stellar based. Only later did it become lunar based, but then something happened where they didn't trust the moon anymore. So they switched over to solar based. Gemini. Gemini was the true shepherd of Anu. Only later did it become the great twins. And this is because two separate constellations were merged into one in order to fill that house. Remember the problem the Babylonians had. They had 18 constellations spread across a 360-degree celestial sphere band. But those 18 constellations had to be force-fit into 12 houses for the mansions of the moon. So this is why this is 12 constellations here. But what you're seeing in the left margin is how they force fit constellations together in order to fit them into the 12 houses that you've become familiar with. So Gemini was the true shepherd of Anu, later to become the great twins. The crab, which is basically stayed the same way for thousands of years. It hasn't changed, except for the fact in some cultures it was the turtle. Not much difference between a crab and a turtle. The lion wasn't a lion in ancient Babylon. That's very, very recent. Leo was not recognized. It was the great dog. Is exactly what I showed in my Graham Hancock video. That last Graham Hancock video I did showing he's absolutely wrong, completely wrong on almost everything on Younger Dryas, Atlantis, on the zodiacal dating, because the ancient Egyptians had no lion constellation. To them, it was the sickle, which is very close to a plow. Yeah, the whole argument completely collapses Graham Hancock's whole entire thesis about dating Giza and the Sphinx to 10,500 BC. Because if we use his model, then Taco Bell is also founded in 10,000 BC, and so is every other building in the world that faces due east, exactly where the constellation Leo rises in the spring. It's dumb. It's so dumb. So here is Virgo. Virgo was the furrow. Now, I'm gonna admit that there is a correlate here, and it's sexual. It's totally sexual. The furrow was also used in ancient times as a sexual denoting of the female body part. The man was the plow and the female was the furrow. We see this when Samson confronted the Philistines and told them, I see that you have been plowing with my heifer. He was talking about they had been conspiring and having sex with his girlfriend, Delilah. So the furrow standing for Virgo is a pretty good association. The scales being Libra is ancient. They haven't changed. The scorpion being Scorpio is ancient, but it comes from an older system that the tetramorph was later based on. I've described this many times. The earliest astronomies in the world only regarded the four royal stars: Fomalhaut, Regulus, Antares. I can't remember the other one, but there's four royal stars, and they form the divine cross of heaven. But they also provide the four corners of the divine cosmic pyramid, because the pole star was the apex of that pyramid. So the four royal stars geometrically connected to the pole star made the cosmic pyramid. This is the most ancient astronomical model. These four royal stars marked the four quadrants of heaven. The four quadrants of heaven was Scorpio was one of them. The scorpion ruled one house. The phoenix ruled one house. The bull of heaven ruled one house. This wasn't Taurus. This was the bull quadrant of heaven, the whole quarter of heaven. And then the man-like creature, the creature with human face, was the other quadrant of heaven. It wasn't an eagle quadrant. It was originally the phoenix quadrant. So that's where Scorpio came from. They took one of the four quadrants of heaven. This is also where Taurus came from. They took one of the four quadrants of heaven. Also, Aquarius. Aquarius has been hidden. Aquarius is a conceptual connection. We'll get to it in a minute. So the next one is Sagittarius. Sagittarius is actually a minor deity in ancient Babylon called Pabilsag. Then we have the goatfish, Capricorn. Again, we have a sheep and we have a fish. They're two separate constellations. What do you do when you have to force fit 18 star patterns into 12 lunar mansions? You put them together. What happened? So what we got was Capricorn. we got a goat and a fish put together, but it's actually two separate constellations anciently. Then Aquarius, we get to Aquarius. This one has confused a lot of people, but Aquarius is a new attachment to the concept of the zodiac, because Aquarius was originally the great bird, and in ancient England, it was the phoenix. It was called the great one. It was called Bennu. It was called the phoenix. For this presentation, you would do yourself a service and remember this association. The great one, Bennu, and Phoenix. It's going to become very, very important in this presentation. Remember, the subject matter of this video is about the origin of Babylonian astronomy and astrology, period. Why watch the sky? All right, so the last one is Pisces, the field. The field and the tails of the swallow. These are two separate constellations that were force fit into the same lunar mansion. When it comes to Aquarius, the association of Aquarius, which is a figure pouring out a vase of water or a bucket of water, the only real association here is the water and the pouring of the water. How does that associate to Bennu? How does that associate to the Phoenix? Well, I'm going to tell you, we already know that Phoenix is interchangeable with Typhon. Typhon was the bringer of the flood waters. So there is an association here. It's very old. This is tablet 1 of MUL.APIN. It's basically the source code for Babylonian astronomy and astrology. This is what the scholars default to. This is tablet 1. MUL.APIN is the name of all of Babylonian astronomy to the Babylonians. And it literally means the stars of the plow. The plow constellation among the northern constellations is rather insignificant. It is also known as Triangulum and is tucked between the Pleiades, Andromeda, and Perseus. Let me repeat that, but let me repeat it as what they really are. The Pleiades, Andromeda, and Perseus. And the plow is right there in the middle of them. These are actually the seven, the sacrificial maiden, and the destroyer. That's the actual meanings of these. So the question is, how did the entire science, practices, traditions, the priestly colleges, how did all of Babylonian astronomy and astrology, and by extension, Assyrian and every civilization that came afterward, how did it come to be called after a rather insignificant constellation, MUL.APIN, the plow? What are we missing? So, further complicating the matter is that MUL.APIN knowledge only extends to, at the most, 1300 BC, but that's rounded off. This is Rupert Gladow in The Origin of the Zodiac, page 158. He is basically the expert on these matters. This is the guy that spent 40 years researching the matter, and he's one of the very few who did his PhD dissertation on the origin of the Zodiac. So prior to MUL.APIN, Babylonia, and by extension the entire world, did not even employ a zodiac of constellations at all. Before 1300 BC, the Babylonians religiously observed and recorded the movements of Venus. This is the heliacal risings and settings of Venus. Babylonian astronomy before 1300 BC is preserved in the Venus Almanac of Ammi-Zaduga. I think it's Ammi-Zaduga. This is in the History of the Zodiac by Robert Powell, page 99. Now, Historians round off to about 1700 BC, but in Archaix, we already know the system did not develop until after the Phoenix cataclysm of the Ogygian deluge in the year 1687 BC. It's only 13 years after the scholarly approximate. So it was the Ogygian event that made Venus appear to fill the sky as recorded by Marcus Varro and other ancient writers. This is in the research of Immanuel Velikovsky. Venus changed its size, its color, and its motion across the sky, which led Babylonian astronomers to record all its movements afterward in hopes of predicting any future disasters. So the Venus almanacs were the result of a destruction that had not been predicted because they weren't watching Venus. So now they developed their entire astronomy just watching Venus. They didn't care about anything but Venus. They watched Venus like Egypt watched Sirius. And at this time in ancient times, they didn't give a damn about the sun or the moon. During the period of the Venus almanacs, we also have the Babylonian astrolabes that mark the 36 stars connected with the months of the year. That is very similar to the 36 decans of the ancient Egyptian astronomy. Yeah, the pre-Egyptian zodiac was totally different. Well, there wasn't a zodiac, but before the zodiac, the pre-zodiac astronomy of Egypt was based off 36 divisions of the sky called decans for a celestial sphere of 360 degrees, each degree signifying a day of the calendar. Both systems at least 1,000 years older than the development of solar zodiacs. This isn't me telling you this, guys. This is the people who know their shit. This is what they're telling us. These systems were already in place and operable. This was the astronomy of Egypt and of Babylonia, and these were implemented over 1,000 years before solar zodiacs ever appeared. But something happened in the year 1273 BC that made Babylonian astronomers abandon their obsession with Venus. That something was the Phoenix, and it appeared out of the northern heavens. It darkened the sun. It blanketed the world in red dust, and earthquakes shook the world. Babylon, like Egypt, realized they could not trust the sun and constructed lunar calendars marking those 18 constellations that served as the path of the moon. Anyone who has read my Chronicon knows 1273 BC was a Phoenix year, and it was predicted, and it was destructive. And it perfectly lines up with Babylonian astronomy for when they suddenly made a switch from Venus almanacs to developing a lunar system. Zealously, they resurrected a very ancient astronomer cult, the cult of MUL.APIN. For the oldest Babylonian traditions had informed them that long before that they had observed the birth of Venus and employed their Venus almanacs, their predecessors feared the northern heavens in the region of the plow. The region of MUL.APIN had brought a terrible end to their forefathers. A single artifact from the ancient world preserves this story. This is not a theory. I've already showed you that round disc. That round disc is the artifact that shows that the cult of MUL.APIN had previously known that the danger comes from the plow. They previously recorded that the destruction descends out of the north. So we're going to go through what's on that disc, and we're going to show you what the date the scholars gave it. The artifact, Babylonian tablet K8-538. As a matter of fact, I'm showing you the tablet, but I need to show you my screen. The artifact is Babylonian tablet K8538. This relic preserves precise astronomical data, an eyewitness account of a great destruction from atop a Babylonian tower. The Sumerian astronomer recorded trajectory of a strange object, its motion for 7 days before the destruction, and its daily distance, as well as employing trigonometry. The scholars, I believe that's Joachim Seifert and Frank Lemke, even provide a precise date for the event and show that it began a 300-year-long dark age. That's that disc I showed you with the strange triangles on it. The tablet is masterwork. It is a masterly work, explaining with as little text a maximum amount of impact event features. Now, that's just theory. We'll get to that in a minute. They read the destruction on the disc and imported their own idea as to how that destruction could have happened. So the tablet is a late Babylonian copy of an early Old Sumerian original. And the scholars realized that this tablet had been copied over and over and over and multiple times, and they show the evidence of it. And they show other copies that were variants of the MUL.APIN tradition. So this information was known to ancient Babylonian astronomers, and they kept it in their libraries, but they forgot. Why did they forget? Because something else happened that caused them to create the Venus almanac system. Then something else happened that caused them to only watch the Pleiades. Then something else happened which caused them to abandon the stellar systems and adopt a lunar system. Then all of a sudden, in 713 BC, the moon got caught playing false. We'll get to that in another video on 713 BC. But they couldn't measure by that anymore, and they developed solar zodiacs and solar calendars. So the K8538 tablet had high priority in Babylonian times because it provided the documented evidence that something emerged out of the northern constellation Triangulum, MUL.APIN, the plow, an event that influenced the origin of Babylonian astronomy and with which its religion rested. This is profound. We have scholars telling us an artifact from the 7th century BC literally is telling us the story with the other MUL.APIN tablets that an event from the sky that caused destruction is the origin of Babylonian astronomy and its very religion. And we're going to see that in this presentation because I have a lot to show you that's going to be amazing. For this reason, the K8538 was guarded, copied, and refreshed over more than 1,500 years until the late Babylonian period. The tablet is on display in room 55 of the British Museum in London, where it was ignored for over a century. It was recovered in archaeological excavations at the site of the ancient town of Nineveh. Sir Austin Henry Layard conducted the excavations during the years 1847 to 1852. After discovering the ruins of the royal library of King Ashurbanipal, which was burnt down in 612 BC. This disc was buried in 612 BC and forgotten, absolutely forgotten, for 2,500 years. And then when it was excavated, it was among 20,000 tablets that were sent to the British Museum. And it was lost for 125 years in the archives of the British Museum, to come to us today and be researched recently. All right, so this artifact depicts the cataclysmic event that began the Babylonian astronomy of MUL.APIN. Let us have a peek at the scientific paper. So let's look at it. The Sumerian K8538 tablet So their title is The Great Meteor Impact Devastating Mesopotamia. I'm going to show you scientific material that does away with that theory. But we'll get to that later. Joachim Seifert, Frank Lemke, whatever I don't know how to pronounce it. So we're just going through. It's a long article. It's a long scientific paper, and it's got a lot of boring stuff. So I highlighted the relevant material. So the tablet is a late Babylonian copy of an early Old Sumerian original. Written cuneiform signs of two zodiacal constellations, Orion and Triangulum, are later Babylonian copy scribe additions and were not part of the Sumerian original. Why? Because there was no zodiac. They didn't know. The K8538 is the world's first scientific documentation on approach and terrestrial impact of a large comet on Earth. Now, you guys know I'm gonna disagree with that. I'm not saying things don't fall out of the sky. I'm not. But I am saying that those big old giant impact craters aren't impact craters. That's what I am saying. I've been saying that. Those things are formed only underwater, and they're formed under the ocean, and they're like caldera. It's when the world outgasses, and under the intense pressure of a sea, it bowls out after all that gas billows up. They've been found. There's a lot of them found. Now, but this was their idea because this is what they thought, because it was something in the sky and it created a bunch of destruction. I follow Ignatius Donnelly's concept more than I do the Randall Carlson one of huge rocks from the sky doing things on Earth. I follow Ignatius Donnelly. And Ignatius Donnelly described Typhon as appearing and raining gravel and rocks on our world. They're small. They're not giant city-sized rocks that take out continents. No, they're small. And many of the geological formations and deposits in our world didn't come from our world. They're being deposited by the Phoenix phenomenon. The impact itself is not described as a blast pressure wave, but rather as an ash and dust tempest rising out of mud sediments. Pretty interesting. So they're honest. At least they're being honest that the impact theory they have is countered by the fact that there's no blast pressure wave recorded. And this guy was pretty close to the impact area. How do we know he was close? Because he survived and he wrote about it. The K8538 tablet had high priority in Babylonian times because it provided the documented evidence that the comet emerged out of the constellation Triangulum, which the Babylonians called MUL.APIN, onto which late Babylonian astronomy and religion rested. The tablet eyewitness account shows MUL.APIN as the celestial seat of gods and celestial source of destructive meteors on Earth. The most insignificant constellation in the sky is feared by Babylon after this event because of this great destruction that came from that little bitty constellation. For this reason, the K8538 was guarded, copied, and refreshed over more than 1,500 centuries until the late Babylonian period after the observed meteor impact in 2193 BC. We'll get to that date here in a little while. The comet impact is responsible for a 300-year-long drop in global temperatures combined with lasting mega droughts, which led to the collapse of various ancient civilizations around the world. We already know in 2239 BC was the Typhon flood, and we have scientific data that we've shown in Archaix that many different scientists from multidisciplinary conclusions that the world was destroyed around 2200 BC. The tablet K8538 is the singular most difficult Babylonian tablet to decode. For this reason, only a few scientists tried the challenge over the past 150 years. According to the renowned Assyriologist Ernst Widener, it is one of the most enigmatic Babylonian documents with a unique and enormously difficult text. The tablet is on display. I've already told you about all that. I quoted that verbatim earlier. The tablet is a masterwork of compressing an enormous amount of data into a small tablet. I covered that. There are 7 dots closely marked, 7 stars, unmistakably the 7 sisters, the Pleiades. The observer placed them into a triangle. These are just illustrations of the actual text. Here's how they deciphered all the material. I got more of those. Shown is the comet flight line originating in Triangulum, MUL.APIN, and moving directly into the Pleiades. Observations for those 8 days, the impact was the 8th day, or the destruction was the 8th day. Observations for those eight days show that the flying celestial object itself is getting larger and shining stronger in its approach. Here's more illustrations of like this right here. Here's the cuneiform. So here's the Sumerian cuneiform. This is what it translates to. More pictures. Cuneiform up here. This is what it translates to. That's a constellation you're looking at right there. Orion. The disc has eight pi sections. On the left of the triangulation mark, it says B401401, which means har, which translates to fine milled dust and ash. Pay attention. Dust and ash is the result of this cataclysm. This double entry in Sumerian signifies a reinforcement of the dust sign. It's like saying dust, but to them, it means a whole lot of dust. At the right hand of the trigonometrical mark, the line continues with B532, 532, 532, 532, 532. In Sumerian, doing that a whole bunch of times literally translates to a lot. So we're talking about they reinforced it twice that this object from the sky brought a F-load of dirt that was deposited on the world. Dirt and dust. This isn't ordinary dust because 2 times dust was magnified on the deal. This is a lot of it's mega dust. That's a good one. Thank you, Jackie. It's mega dust. The sky is getting dark. The visible sky darkens in daytime by the dust plume. Man, some of you are seeing the picture. So more information about the sky darkening can be taken from other Sumerian lament literature from the impact time. The daytime was wiped out. Heaven was darkened. It was covered by a shadow. The mountains roared. Dust passed over the mountains. In Iridug, where bright daylight used to shine, the day darkened. What does all that sound like? I don't have to say it. I'm not going to say it. Here's another part of the tablet, another pi wedges. The tablet documents the comet impact during daytime, noon of the 21st day. The impact flashlight is placed as major event into the center. After the impact, the sky darkened. Ash and dust plumes elevated over the impact site, and the plume propagated in the sky toward the north. Remember, we keep emphasizing this came out of the north. Remember this. In a declination angle of 40 degrees to the visible horizon line. What? What ecliptic is that? That's not our ecliptic. What ecliptic is that? So the dust clouds were visible for 7 hours until the night set in. So that means the dust cloud continued at night too. They just couldn't see it. Now, you have to understand, they admit in the scientific article that 40% of the disk is unreadable. So they built this narrative based off a comet impact, because they can't imagine, as scientists, uniformitarians, they can't imagine it being any other thing. But in Archaix, we already know what it is. We can remove all the embellishments, because nowhere on that tablet does it say comet hit the world, a comet impact. This is the interpretation of scientists who are uniformitarian trained. And to them, anything falling out of the sky is a bolide. To them, anything falling out of the sky must be meteoritic or a comet. So, but as we go on, you'll see it's not what happened. The major observation is placed into the picture center on what happens to be the very distant location. It is reported in the center as B548, burning. So a fiery red hot fire glowing in the night in a recognizable shape of, as reported on the bottom horizontal line, B2929, several branching tree-like patterns glowing in the distant dark. There's no way for them to determine how far it was based off this disk. They don't know. What they did is they cross-referenced the information on this disk, and they asked geologists, hey, do you have any impact craters that happened anywhere near the Mesopotamia area? I said, oh, yeah, we do. We have this one right here. It's 3.4 kilometers across. And that's what they went with. And this is why their data was corrupted. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that later. So we have the author of the disc, Eyewitness, says that a great destruction descended for seven to 8 days out of MUL.APIN. And when it arrived, it brought an extraordinary amount of dust that blackened the sun, covered the sky, and yet through all this dust could be seen red burning and more blacker clouds on the far distant horizon. This is what the guy's describing. The K8538 observations describe impact conditions of the bolide into abyssal, check it out, sedimentary mud releasing the impact energy via dust, ash, and vapor plumes, rising from deep out of the shallow Persian Gulf estuary, constantly being fed by renewed inflowing salty Gulf waters, producing vapor columns, elevating sedimentation mud for more than 24 hours into the air. This is all speculation. None of this is described on the disc. It's all speculation. The reason they had to go into this detail is because they know. I'm going to show you the scientific material. They know that a crater that is 3.4 kilometers in diameter would be extremely destructive for the area of impact. But the object itself would have been so small that 100 miles away, everybody would have been surviving just fine. And it can't explain. It can't. The size of that crater means the bolide would have been very small. And it can't account for a 300-year dark age. It can't account for worldwide temperature plummeting. It can't account for everything else, a multidisciplinary approach to the 22nd century BC whole worldwide reset. They've documented, because they've documented a lot about 2200 BC and how the whole world died. And that little rock that creates a crater 3.4 kilometers across would have never been able to do the whole fallout destruction, would have never done it. So they added this in here because they know this. And they're trying to paint a picture that, oh, well, the rock didn't hit basement rock. It didn't hit the land anywhere. It hit a muddy area. And that's where all that dust and mud came from. Because when it hit that muddy area, it softened the impact. And it allowed people less than 100 miles away to visually see it and record it on a disc. And yet it's the object that reset the whole world. Do you see the problem here? Their interpretation of what happened goes totally against the scientific data that shows that at that time and period, the whole world did die. It did, but it couldn't have been that crater, couldn't have been that bolide. So anyway, you just got to read through the BS, guys. They're doing their best, but it's uniformitarian. They are trained to think in uniformitarian principles. So they're thinking it has to be a comet or an asteroid. It has to be a comet because it was observed coming and the destruction happened, so it must have landed on our world. They just don't understand. They have no idea what the historical record says. The Sphinx does. So, all right, we'll get to that in a minute. Here's more pictures showing the constellations. Very precise information on this tablet. Even the scientists were impressed. The MUL.APIN cult and the origin of constellations. Doesn't it blow your mind? I haven't even shown you the Sphinx connections yet. I haven't even started them yet. But doesn't it blow your mind to even entertain the idea that the Sphinx phenomenon is the origin of worldwide astronomical systems? That the whole reason ancient astronomies were even founded and developed was to watch for that red bastard in the sky when it appeared because it always reset us? Does that blow your mind? Because that's exactly what this artifact is showing. So you'll see it as this presentation continues. This is Near Eastern scholarship telling us that the MUL.APIN cult, which is the origin of Babylonian astronomy and Babylonian religion, literally began from an event they dated 2193 BC of an object that appeared in the sky that blanketed our world in so much soil materials that it caused a 300-year-old dark age. That's the tablet. Showing you the location of MUL.APIN, the location of MUL.APIN on the tablet. I'll show it to you in the sky here in a minute. They tried to pinpoint as exactly as possible God's seat in the sky, from where comets, messengers, and envoys emanate. Why would they call? Thank you, Third Space. Love you, man. Why would they call the origin of all the destructions in our world as God's throne? That little bitty insignificant constellation is God's throne. And yet it is the origin of these massive destructions that happen to our world. And it is seated in the sides of the north, in the northern heavens, way above the ecliptic. What's going on? Comets were the punishing envoys of God. His almightiness manifests itself in that nobody on earth is capable to withhold God's envoyed comets and escape God's punishment. They're still going with the comet interpretation. Triangulum was the seat of God. The question remains, from which century on? Bradley Schaeffer determined that all 600 BC MUL.APIN tablets were already transcripts. He traced the MUL.APIN cult back to 1370 BC. That's interesting, but it's also an approximate. We know that in 1273 BC, which is really close, 1273 BC was a particularly bad Phoenix appearance over the Near East. It may not have affected the Americas, but it was over the Near East. They even say it's plus or minus 100 years. So it's a dead ringer for 1273 BC. The tablet copy scribe improved the triangulum image by fattening it to produce a recognizable triangle or plow. MUL.APIN impression for his audience. Please remember you saw this. MUL.APIN, plow, coming out of the northern heavens. This is the key here that this artifact preserves. That the plow in ancient Sumerian came out of the throne of God to reset the world, to revitalize the world with soil materials and all that, and it's called MUL.APIN in Sumerian. So important to the later Babylonians that they didn't change the logogram. It's still the same. It's left untranslated in the text. Orion is called the faithful shepherd in the sky. There are no planets for computer calculations mentioned on the tablet. Nothing about planetary astronomy on the MUL.APIN tablet. On the K8 tablet, the disk that we're talking about right now. We know that the destructive cosmic comet impact in Mesopotamia occurred in 2193 BC, which is confirmed in cuneiform historical witness accounts as well as the geological exploration results. I agree with all that. The only mistake they made was associating what was recorded on this artifact with a local crater about 100 kilometers away that has a diameter of 3.4 kilometers, which is nowhere near large enough to do anything close to starting a 300-year dark age for the entire world. It would have never been big enough. It would have been a local destruction only. And by local, it would have completely vaporized all of Mesopotamia area. That dude wouldn't have been able to even record this and write it all down. We can throw impact out the window because the impact itself isn't even on the disk. This is creative license by uniformitarian scientists who are just trying to understand the text they're translating. That's it. I tell you guys all the time, uniformitarianism is a box. It was specifically designed to train the mind to form certain conclusions and to not look for evidence elsewhere. If you want perfect examples of uniformitarian thinking, Randall Carlson's the best. If you really want to see someone who is absolutely brainwashed into a paradigm, just watch Randall Carlson. He's going to give it to you every single day. It's almost as if he's reading from high school textbooks. It is so boring. But you can follow him and you'll get tired of that drivel after a while because uniformitarian explanations for our history and our world only create more questions. They don't answer anything. Yeah, man, it's so bizarre. So bizarre these people are still on it, man. So, all right, followed by ash plume elevation, which darkened the day. Hot burning ash columns lit the sky at night. The comet crashed in a densely populated area, producing an impact crater of 3.4 kilometers in diameter. This is all supposition. They're trying to wrap their minds around what they're reading. The impact terminated the Sumerian society for an entire generation. No historical activity, records on commerce, trade, building, agriculture, government, or military activities, etc. exist for the period of 2193 to 2157 BC. Not because none are preserved, but because none were made by scribes. Only city destruction laments are preserved. From 2157 BC on, Sumerian society resumed on a small scale on the Euphrates River in the town of Gursu under Urbaba and Judea of Lagash, followed by the Third Dynasty period in 2112 BC. The fact that there are no tablet records for Sumerian society of this devastation period, 2193 through 2157, is to be seen in comparative relation to extensive tablet collections made and preserved before and after this devastation time span. Listen, I can take the exact same facts that they just asserted about there's no records were ever developed during this period. I can take those same facts using just backdating the entire event to where it's supposed to go. It's supposed to go 46 years into the past. How do I know? Because that's 2239 BC. It is the Typhon destruction. It is the beginning of a 300-year dark age all over the world. It is the beginning of the second Egyptian intermediate period. They're very clever, those Egyptologists. They don't want to admit that their civilization has suffered the same resets as other civilizations. They don't want to admit any of that. So what do they call them? They call it the first Egyptian intermediate period, the second Egyptian intermediate period, and the third Egyptian intermediate period. All three intermediate periods line up on Phoenix phenomenon dates. Every single one of them were because the entire world was reset, Egypt included. Every fact that they mentioned right here fits perfectly if we just backdate 46 years from your 2193 BC date for the destruction that came out of the plow. MUL.APIN backdated 46 years to 2239 BC, and everything you said right here still remains true. There were no records, and it's not that we don't have records from before, and it's not like we don't have records after the 300 years, but we sure as hell don't have any from 2239 BC to about 2000 BC because nobody was making them. They were just trying to survive. Global temperature drops and mega droughts on Earth follow as standard consequences, being abrupt, high magnitude, and century-long events. A 300-year mega drought and a sharp drop in temperatures from 2193 BC after the Sumerian impact is well documented for the Belt, Spain, Mediterranean, Egypt, West Asia regions. It's the whole world. It's the whole world, guys. And they're just 46 years off. It's 2239 BC, and all this remains true. The problem that these guys have, and the reason other scientists aren't really taking them seriously, is because you added that crater, which is 3.4 kilometers across, and it's nowhere near large enough to do what other geologists and historians and archaeologists and scientists already know is true. And it's true that there's a 300-year period where the world was virtually emptied and destroyed. So they're wrestling between two data sets, trying to fit them together, and you can't. They have one series correct. The other series is force fit from uniformitarian thinking. The information is adequate to reconstruct the detailed comet advance and the impact process sequence. The position of the astronomical tower was at a 31-degree latitude and at a distance of about 60 miles from the cosmic impact site. Do you see the problem with that? Witnessing the impact flashing light in the sky, followed by elevation of fiercely glowing ash plumes. If the survivor recorded the event like we know he did, because we have the Babylonian K8 tablet in room 55 of the British Museum right now. If he survived an impact event that reset the world for 300 years, he sure as hell couldn't have been within 60 miles of it. There's no way. The math would never add up. There's no way. The K8538 observation tablet was made by an unknown alert Sumerian astronomer who sensed the historical significance of the event on his astronomical lookout tower and decided to document it. Again, they're probably right, but it's also embellishment. How do we know it's embellishment? Because none of that's on the tablet. So they are extrapolating. All I'm showing you is the tablet is recording a real event. So let's break it down, what the tablet's really telling us. This is what we're talking about right here. Scholars built an impact narrative from the scant facts. Whether an impact occurred or not doesn't even really matter. The dating and description are clearly of a Phoenix event. The problem with the impact theory for 2193 BC is that it caused more problems than it solves, similar to the Younger Dryas impact theory, which is now completely ludicrous. The authors built their impact theory based off of a nearby crater 3.44 kilometers in diameter. A meteorite impact that leaves a 3.4 kilometer diameter crater on Earth would be locally devastating, not hemispheric, not worldwide. The impact energy would be equivalent to about 100 to 200 megatons of TNT, far exceeding the largest nuclear bomb ever tested. And ejecta, the debris, would be thrown out, blanketing the surrounding area with a layer of rock fragments up to several meters thick within 10 to 20 kilometers, and finer dust spreading hundreds of kilometers, potentially causing fires and burying landscapes. A massive fireball would form, radiating intense heat that could ignite fires and cause third-degree burns up to 10 to 15 kilometers away. The impact would trigger an earthquake of magnitude 6 to 7 on a magnitude of 6 to 7 on the Richter scale, felt hundreds of kilometers away, potentially causing landslides and structural damage in nearby regions. Dust and soot lofted into the atmosphere could cause temporary regional cooling and reduce sunlight for weeks to months, affecting local agriculture, but not enough for worldwide impact winter or mass extinction. The overall catastrophe level would be regional, capable of destroying a large city or small country-sized area, thousands of square kilometers, with potential fatalities in the hundreds of thousands to millions if it hit a densely populated area or urban zone. However, if it lands in a remote area, ocean, or desert, human impact could be minimal. Unlike kilometer scale asteroids, this impact would not threaten human civilization as a whole or lead to widespread extinction events. Problem: if it was an impact, it was not sufficient to change worldwide weather systems, create a mini ice age. It was local destruction only, but scientific data all over the world does show that a 300-year period of ruin and cold started in 2200 BC, about, and lasted until 1900 BC. This was a major intermediate period for Egypt as well, meaning no records, no development, no history. Therefore, the MUL.APIN tablet is perfectly describing a destructive event, its origin and effects, but allusions to impact are creative interpretation. It could not have been too bad if an eyewitness so perfectly recorded it and survived to do so. So, having said that, what you can do for yourself to verify that what I just told you is true, you can go to Grok AI and you can give it specific instructions and say, please go through all the relevant up-to-date scientific material and answer for me if a crater 3.4 kilometers across could have been the result of an object that plummeted the world into a 300-year cooling period and dark age and depopulated the world. That's the answer Grok gave me. You can do the same thing. This is the answer Grok gave. Basically, hell no. All right. So now we've covered the artifact. We have covered the intro. On MUL.APIN, Babylonian astronomy, we've covered basically the scientific paper of these two scholars on the deciphering of that. But we're left with triangulum being called MUL.APIN. MUL.APIN is a most insignificant. It's just 3 stars. It's a triangle. It's insignificant until at one time in Sumerian times, something came out of it and completely destroyed their world to where their descendants turned it into a priority, which became astronomy and religion, and then built off it and built up a whole throne of God, anger of God and throne of God ideology based off the fact that was a throne. And it came from in between the sacrificial maiden Andromeda and Perseus the destroyer. So this is where we get to the Archaix research. This is Archaix veterans. You're going to see some new stuff here. This is where we put all this together because it's called the Apin. It's called the MUL.APIN. It's called the plow. It came from the throne of God. It came from, on the celestial sphere, it came out of the sides of the north. These are the facts we're left with. It brought red mud. It brought red burning fiery dirt and dust and blanketed the world. These are the facts that we've been given from this artifact. So the Apin is the source of destruction. The disc reads that the Apin is the source for destructions on Earth. The authors admit that the date of the event is not on the disc, but they date it according to scientific evidence that approximately 2195 BC, there was a vast destruction event in Mesopotamia. This is actually very close to the date for the Typhon flood of Noah caused by the Sphinx in 2239 BC. As we have seen in the Ignatius Donnelly's Ragnarok, Age of Fire and Gravel, the actual collapse of a vapor canopy came from this object. The flooding wasn't worldwide, but it was experienced all over the world, meaning the whole world didn't flood, but there was flooding everywhere. And the main thing that rained from the sky was gravel and dust. As shown in Archaix before and later in this presentation, Apin is a known reference for the Sphinx. The tablet describes sky darkening, the fall of ash and debris from the sky, and rain of dirt and mud and a red sky. A destruction so complete that Babylonian astronomers named their entire science of observing the heavens after the place in the sky where the destruction came from. Mul, the stars, Apin, plow. The event is responsible for a 300-year mega drought and worldwide drop in temperature. Here are the facts. A major destructive event occurred about 2193 BC. B, origin of destruction came from the Plough constellation, MUL.APIN. C, MUL.APIN is in the northern heavens. D, the event was a rain of dirt, mud, ash, darkening of the sky, burning, storms, and civilization destroyed. E, the event is origin of Babylonian astronomy, cult of MUL.APIN. Such a series of facts, if true, must be corroborated elsewhere. Remember, what is one of the Archaix tenets? If something is true, you're going to see it from multiple different vantage points. So we already know that the Sphinx caused the 2239 BC Typhon flood destruction. How do we know? Because we have published books and data sets and multiple videos that cover this that anybody can see for free. We know that the Sphinx buries civilizations in red dust, red mud, and red rains, and resets the human race. And in ancient times, sometimes the phoenix was said to bring cinnamon to the skies. This darkening of the sun, and it is a storm bringer, hence typhon being the origin of typhoon. But let's look deeper at the mystery of MUL.APIN. Apin as descriptor of Phoenix in Old Babylonia. A book full of academic findings in 1900 titled The Reports of Magicians and Astrologers of Babylon and Nineveh reads, when Apin reaches the path of the sun, there will be a famine of cattle. There will be want. When a planet and Apin stands facing one another, there will be an invasion of the enemy. So the Apin was an event in the sky that, when juxtaposed to other things, it was used as like in the omen texts. This is the translation of a cuneiform text. So translators are confused, some thinking that Apin is a reference to the planet Mars, because the descriptions of Apin in the cuneiform Babylonian text are of a red object, and Mars is red. But in the same text, the planet Mars is affirmatively identified by them as Lula, or Lule, or Lula. So this is in the reports of the magicians and astrologers of Babylon and Nineveh. So it's other scholars that point out that Apin can't be Mars. We already know what Mars is. It's Lula. The confusion in the 19th century among scholars is equally fascinating because the tablets have explanatory notes from Babylonian scribes. These are footnotes by scribes made thousands of years ago, not by scholars today. And in those footnotes, even the scribes are admitting to the confusion as to what the hell the Apin was. Zechariah Sitchin wrote that MUL.APIN is an astronomical document involving all 360 degrees of the heavens, mentioning planets, mentioning stars, and a celestial body called Apin. The identity of this Apin as an independent of its origin, the plow or triangulum on the northern heavens, is better found in ancient Egypt. Remarkably, both early Babylonia and Egypt had originally stellar calendars and divided the celestial sphere into 36 sections. Babylon watched Venus and Egypt watched Sirius. What we have with this section here, Apin as a descriptor of Phoenix in Old Babylonia, is an admission by Babylonian scribes that the Apin object was independent of the plow sign. It was an actual object that came from MUL.APIN, but by itself it was just called the Apin. This is what's described by the scribal footnotes. They're confused themselves. But if we're going to see proof of this, we're going to have to look beyond Babylonia. So let's look and see what the Egyptians said about this object. So we have Pen God as descriptor of Phoenix in Egypt. So Heliopolis was the city of the sun, a metropolis of learning with universities and libraries known to Greece, Anatolia, Ionia, Crete, Phoenicia, Canaan, Syria, Mesopotamia, Rome, and India. In this city of the sun, in Egypt, at an old temple, was located the mansion of the Phoenix, which housed the pyramidion called the Bin, where astronomer priests taught the Heliopolitan concept of reoccurring cycles of time connected to the archaic Bennu bird. Remember this word, Bennu bird. This is ancient Egyptian. The purple-plumed phoenix of Greek tradition, according to Andrew Collins in The Gods of Eden. not to be confused with William Brambley's Gods of Eden. Two different books, two different authors. I mentioned William Brambley a lot. The Heliopolitan cosmology of Egypt as revealed in Edfu reliefs held that before the appearance of the Neteru, the gods, the Pin god appeared in some kind of violent conflict which brought to close the first period of creation at Zeptepi, that's the pre-flood world. An enemy appeared in the form of a serpent, a dragon, known as the Great Leaping One. As a consequence of this mass destruction, the first inhabitants all die, and darkness returns to the world. The Pin god would be the same as the Apin. Egyptian tradition provides no date, but the Pin god is the same as the Fiend deity or the Phoenix, also called Typhon or Typhon. It brings death and decay, and the earth vanishes into the watery none of chaos and perpetual dark. It is a flood. The Pin god is also called the Falcon and the Winged One. The winged disc of the Near East being the greatest symbol for Phoenix and the most widely misinterpreted symbol ever. Throughout thousands of official translations and reference books in hundreds of languages for the last 3 centuries, all so-called authorities claim the winged disc, seen so prolifically throughout the reliefs and art of the ancient world, was simply a symbol for the sun, an absolute lie. Sitchin thought it was a symbol for Nibiru because it was a red disc with wings. So the Pin god is the Bennu bird. The Bennu bird was celestial, and in its appearance signaled the death of the first time, Zeptepi, the golden age of the gods, and the commencement of a new epic. This refers clearly to the Phoenix cycle, the Phoenix closing one age to begin another. Andrew Collins wrote that each time the Bennu bird was seen to return over Heliopolis, it marked the end of an eon and the commencement of the next. Robert Temple, in his book, The Sirius Mystery, explains that the Egyptians believed that the disappearances and appearances of the divine Bennu bird were linked to violent cosmic cycles and to the destruction and rebirth of world ages. It's the Phoenix cycle of 552 years that we've talked about so much. The Pin god could be the Egyptian word Bapin, an obscure deity meaning the ram, that was dreaded and yet signified spiritual transition. A ram and a plow both impact surfaces. The Pin god, or Bapin, are found on Greek-era Egyptian monuments at Edfu and the Book of the Night. There is some evidence that the Greek god Pan may have derived from Pin. Pan is known as the god of shepherds and flocks, metaphorically, humans being the sheep. He had ram's horns, and his name is said to be the original word for panic. There appears here an etymological link between panic and phoenix. Herodotus wrote that according to Egyptian chronology, Pan was the most ancient of the gods. But according to the version in which Pan was the son of Hermes and Penelope, he was born only 800 years before Herodotus. So the Egyptians had their versions and the Greeks had theirs. Though Pan is a Greek deity, there is an old legend that states that when Typhon, the phoenix, attacked in the reign of the Titans, Pan escaped by leaping into the Nile River in Egypt, as reported by Hyginus in Poetic Astronomy. Pan means all. And the ancient expression, the great god Pan is dead, came to mean that all evil had been destroyed. In this sense, Pan becomes Panics, Phoenix. So, Apin out of the north. Remember how many references we saw on the disc that the destruction came out of MUL.APIN and that MUL.APIN is out of the north? Look. one of the greatest destructions of the ancient world, which started the Great Mediterranean Dark Age in 1135 BC and is the origin of the Atlantis narrative, was a Phoenix event. A Babylonian tablet text dated approximately 1140 BC reads, "After 2 hours of the night had passed, a great star shone from north to south. At this exact date, the Babylonians recorded that the star object darkened the sun." This is in Chronicon. The event was 1135 BC on Phoenix's 138-year timeline. This citation is quoted in Chronicon, and the event inspired the Babylonians to write this statement, also found in cuneiform. "When a star shines and its brilliance is as bright as the light of day, in its shining, it takes a tail like a scorpion. It is a fortunate omen. When there is Bennu in all lands, violence will pass away. There will be justice when a great star shines from north to south." This is in the reports of the magicians and astrologers of Babylon and Nineveh by the scholars who translated texts and published them in 1900. When Bennu is in all the lands, when a star travels from north to south. 1140 BC is a scientific bullseye for the accurate date of 1135 BC when this happened. How do we know it was then? Because the text is from Nebuchadnezzar I, who was ruling in 1135 BC when this event occurred. This text is from an ancient Babylonian tablet that concerns Nebuchadnezzar I of Babylon, who brought ruin to Elam, or conquered Elam after it was destroyed in the cataclysm. That's why the omen text shows that when a star comes from north to south and brings Bennu, you've already seen the word Bennu was related to Phoenix. It's talking about dust, brings all this Bennu, cinnamon from the sky. It's a good omen. Well, it was a good omen, because the Neo-Babylonian Empire founded by Nebuchadnezzar I was because he defeated the Elamites in a war. And the Elamites are the ancestral enemies of the Babylonians. Therefore, Elam probably got messed off in whatever destructive Phoenix cataclysm that happened, and Nebuchadnezzar took it as an attack of opportunity and went over there and conquered his enemy. So to him, the sign was good. This text is from ancient Babylonian tablet that concerns Nebuchadnezzar I of Babylon, who brought ruin to Elam or conquered Elam after it was destroyed in the cataclysm. The key Babylonian word here is Bennu, left untranslated in the text, meaning it is a word older than the text that preserved it. Bennu. In ancient Egyptian, it's the name of the phoenix.
Archaeology and numismatics confirm the historical accounts that the solar zodiac of Aries through Pisces was fully developed only in late Alexandrian times. The earliest coins were minted about 600 BC, but it would take 700 years before coins would appear showing the solar zodiac signs. The zodiac coins of Antoninus Pius were minted in Alexandria, Egypt, around 144-145 AD, and feature astrological imagery, including planetary signs and zodiacal bands. This series of 13 coins comprises 12 coins, each representing a different zodiac sign, and one coin showing the complete zodiac wheel. One well-known example depicts the moon goddess Luna, with the zodiac sign Cancer beneath her, dating to the 8th year of Antoninus Pius' rule, which corresponds to 144-145 AD. This is the exact dating of Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos, or the Four Books, and Almagest, his treatise on astrology that first mentioned all the solar zodiac signs we are familiar with today, Aries through Pisces. This is also the exact date the four Gospels were composed. The Hamadtavaria zodiac on the Sea of Galilee is a 4th century AD zodiac mixing pagan and Jewish concepts, with Helios at the center. The mosaic is the centerpiece of the Severus Synagogue and includes a zodiac with Helios driving a chariot in the middle. One of the earliest known depictions is seen in the Zodiac mosaic from the synagogue of Beth Alpha in Israel, which dates to the 6th century AD. This mosaic features a wheel with the 12 zodiac signs surrounding a depiction of Helios, the sun god. Each sign is clearly identifiable and corresponds closely to our modern understanding of the zodiac. Rupert Gliedau, in The Origin of the Zodiac on page 53, wrote, "The 11th century is the time when we first find diagrams of the astrological man, a human figure with the signs of the zodiac applied to the different parts of the body. The oldest identified Christian zodiac art is found in the north rose window of the Basilica of Saint Denis in Paris, France, and dates to around 1145 AD. While older zodiac art exists, including in Jewish and Roman contexts, the Saint Denis window is considered the earliest significant example of its incorporation into the Christian iconography. A diagram of the zodiac has been found from 1277 AD in gold paint on parchment. A calendar page from 1405 of the Limburg brothers in the Belles Heures of Jeanne de France shows Capricorn, and another Limburg brothers from 1416 shows the solar zodiac at Chantilly, France. The solar zodiac from Aries to Pisces, having been developed during the Alexandrian period of the Greek Ptolemies of Egypt 200 BC to 200 AD, is an established historical and archaeological fact. This is the modern world's version of the astrological zodiac. Thus, this version of the zodiac was developed during the Roman Empire, when the Alexandrian Library was a collection of colleges attended by a large population of Greeks, Romans, Jews, Mauritanians, Libyans, Egyptians, Bithynians, Armenians, Indians, and Gauls. It has been noted that the Rabbinical Book of Jubilees, which focuses on chronology and calendars, does not mention the solar zodiac. Also, in the research paper of Helen R. Jacobus, the zodiac sign names in the Dead Sea Scrolls 4Q 318, found on academia.edu, we find that in the solar zodiac of Aries through Pisces was by the Dead Sea text writers influenced by both Hellenistic Babylonia, Syria, or the Greeks, and dates to as early as the 2nd century BC. Also, no zodiac appears in the entire corpus of the Old Testament writings. The claim that Mazzaroth in the book of Job is a reference to the zodiac is contested by the fact that older versions of the book of Job, like the Peshitta-Syriac text, do not have Mazzaroth and instead have the Great Bear, which perfectly aligns with the spirit of the text. This was a clear interpolation, and the same deceit is found in the newer translations of the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, where it is found that Mazzaroth, being referred to as the 12 signs of the Hebrew zodiac, is a clear interpolation discovered by translators a century ago. It does not appear in earlier translations. There are only 3 passages in the Old Testament massive corpus of writings that refer to constellations, and not one of these refers to the solar zodiac we know today. In Job 38, we find the Pleiades, Orion, and the Great Bear. In Job 9, the Great Bear, Orion, and the Pleiades are mentioned again. In the book of Amos, we find the Pleiades and Orion. Solar nor lunar zodiacs are a thing anywhere in the Bible. The zodiac and planets are incorporated into the Kabbalah, a system whereby the zodiac was a system of human experiences through the houses of the zodiac, not a system of measuring history. The Kabbalah was composed in the 1200s AD. The zodiac was also incorporated into the tarot and was also mentioned as a source of divination and not concerned with measuring historical events or ages of time. These facts come from Rupert Gladow in The Origin of the Zodiac on page 125 in his 40-year PhD thesis on the origin of the Zodiac.
Okay, so that was done. That was done to give, to basically to show you that is from the academic perspective, the Aries through Pisces solar zodiac is of Hellenistic origin. Now, this means Greek. However, the Greeks had already integrated among Egyptian society, and they were the Ptolemies, Macedonian Greek Ptolemies. They were ruling Egypt. Well, there was Babylonian Hellenes as well. Also, there were Syrian Hellenes called Seleucids. So the Hellenes were everywhere, but it was only during the height of the beginning of the Roman Empire did astrology as we know it take off. We have horoscopes from Babylon, and we're going to get to that here in a minute. It was a different type of astrology. And we have Babylonian zodiacs from the MUL.APIN era, totally different zodiac. And we're going to get to that too. This little video was just to show you that there has been an evolution in the concepts attached to the zodiac. Originally, the idea of measuring epochs in history and time and precessional ages, and precession itself was never even attached to the zodiac. The idea of precession wasn't even attached to the zodiac initially, and we'll get to that. This isn't Jason's conclusions. They're not Archaix. This isn't Archaix's data. These are the experts in their field concerning this matter, and it's important to know this because now we have to go straight to Egypt. So, the Dendera zodiac. Everyone defaults to this when they first come into contact with Archaix's criticisms on the zodiac not being very old. Everybody's, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, Jason, man. The Egyptians had the Dendera zodiac. Everybody knows that. Well, Egypt is a very big place in space and time. Yeah, its history goes back thousands of years. So I'm going to give you a proper education right now on the Dendera zodiac. So Egyptologists and other scholars assert that the ancient Egyptians did not know of a solar zodiac. That's not me telling you this. Egyptologists tell you this. There is no solar zodiac to be found in all of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, the wall text, and the various temples of Karnak, Thebes, Abydos, through all of the monuments and tombs of Upper and Lower Egypt. No solar zodiac appears in the funerary text in the Valley of the Kings until the 30th dynasty of Egypt. The end of Egypt. Nothing in hieroglyphics, in hieratic or demotic. Nothing of a zodiac in the Rind Papyrus, in the Edwin Smith Papyrus, the Thule Papyrus, the Turin Papyrus, the Harris Papyrus, the Medinet Habu inscriptions. No solar zodiac can be said to be Egyptian. Remember, guys, this is scholarship. I'm going to show you the actual books this data comes from. For over 1,000 years before the solar zodiac was introduced into Egypt by the Greeks, the Egyptians divided the heavens into 36 decans, with the dog star Sirius beginning the cycle. The first appearance of a semblance of a solar zodiac are the lunisolar planispheres of Esna and Dendera. Planispheres. We have become accustomed to calling it the zodiac of Dendera, but it's no such thing. It shows the circumpolar stars in the middle, and then the constellations branching out in a spiral, and they're not all a match for the zodiac that we know today. Some of them are, and they're a good match, but other ones are not. Scholarship is even engaged in peer-reviewed arguments about who the lions are, because in ancient Egypt, goddesses were represented as lions. So we even have Rupert Gladow, who has published that the lion on the solar zodiac, which is just Greek, it's not even ancient. He says it's not Leo at all. So Esna dates to the beginning of the Ptolemaic Greek Macedonian period of Egypt. We'll be seeing a chart here to show you exactly when this was. And the zodiac of Dendera is about 50 BC, at the end of the Ptolemaic period, at the start of the Roman power and influence over the Mediterranean region. The Esna planisphere zodiac wasn't Egyptian, but merged Babylonian and Greek zodiacs, adding the ancient Egyptian concept of 36 decans. So, you have to understand what's being conveyed here. Scholarship says that the oldest zodiac, Esna, 200 BC, the Esna zodiac is actually a planisphere, and it is an amalgamation of the Babylonian zodiac, the Greek zodiac, with the 36 decans of ancient Egyptian planisphere. So it's an amalgamation of three different cultures' concepts about the sky. This is the oldest zodiac in Egypt. To the Egyptologist, the signs of the zodiac of Dendera are of foreign elements. This is Rupert Gladow. This is distracting me. I'm going to turn this off. I got a pretty good microphone. I don't know if you can hear it. My AC is loud. It's loud to me, so it forces me to be loud. Oh yeah, well, I'm about to drop some truth bombs on you guys. They shocked me. They shocked me when I ordered all of these collegiate level professors books on the origin of the zodiac. I had some shock. I got shocked too, guys. So, to the Egyptologist, the signs of the zodiac of Dendera are of foreign elements. We can't take that lightly. This is Rupert Gladow. I don't know how to say it. It's Gladow, or maybe like Gledo. I don't know. But he wrote a book called The Origin of the Zodiac, which is nothing but his 40 years in the making PhD thesis. He took his thesis and just published it as a book. And it's amazing. I have it in my library now. I've showed it on Twitter too. But the Dendera zodiac introduces a very non-Egyptian element, one that came straight from Babylonian astronomy, in that it shows the 12 star configurations of the zodiacs with their planets in their signs of exaltation. This is History of the Zodiac, Robert Powell. The doctrine of exaltations is distinctly Babylonian and found its way into the Egyptian system in the Hellenistic period, the Greek period, about 200 BC, but it's traced to Babylonia, to 700 BC. Archaix veterans, I know you just had a mind explosion, but this isn't about the Archaix data. But you saw that number, 700 BC. That's how far it's traced back to. All right. The rectangular zodiac of the Temple of Num, I believe that's Num, a couple of miles northwest of Esna, does not have the signs of Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio. The reason it doesn't have these signs is because the zodiac isn't fully developed yet. The zodiac that we know today, Aries through Pisces. This is Egypt. But it too shows the planets and their signs of exaltation, demonstrating that it is very late. It's Babylon-influenced zodiac. Egyptologists and scholars assert that prior to the Hellenistic influence in Egypt, 300 to 100 BC, quote, there is no trace of the 12-fold division of the zodiac to be found in Egypt. This one fact collapses Graham Hancock's theory. Well, we're not going to rely on that because in Archaix, you know what we do? We overwhelm people with facts. This is just a really strong data point. In 1974, Robert Powell began a 30-year research project into the origins of the zodiac, which resulted in his PhD thesis and the publication of this book. The Dendera zodiac is not at all the modern solar zodiac of Aries through Pisces. It is not even Egyptian, but built by the Greek Ptolemies ruling Egypt. It depicts Osiris' 14 body parts and his association to the moon, and even shows the lunar eclipse of September 25th, 52 BC. It is not a solar zodiac and shows the positions of the 5 known planets in constellations as they appeared in 50 BC. A solar eclipse is also shown for March 7th, 51 BC. The center of the Dendera zodiac are located the circumpolar constellations. You know them: Draco, the 7 Rishis, the Great Bear. The so-called Dendera zodiac is a celestial map and not a zodiac. The name is a misnomer. On the walls of the Temple of Dendera are inscriptions that date the monument to April 16th Julian reckoning, which is our AD 17. Yeah. Do I need to repeat that for all those who think the Egyptians had an ancient zodiac? We're talking about the 30th dynasty, the very end of what we know of as Egypt. And their zodiac temple dates to AD 17. This is confirmed by another scholar. Concerning the zodiac of Dendera, Ezra Ivanov in Ancient Origins of the Zodiac wrote on page 14, the accuracy with which these celestial diagrams are rendered can be verified by computer analysis. In the famous round zodiac of Dendera, the only one of its kind discovered in Egypt, the planets are depicted at sunrise on April 17th, 17 AD. This means that the zodiacs of Egypt were made when Hellenized Jews, Greeks, and Romans administered all of Egypt's affairs in the decades just prior to the rise of Christianity. The constellation that came to be called Leo was not a lion to the ancient Egyptians. It was known as the Great Sickle. It's not even a secret. Anyone can Google this. I'm going to show you the image. Graham Hancock's entire thesis, his entire theory of the Sphinx dating to 10,500 BC rests on its connection to Leo. But with Leo removed, this connection does not exist. Hancock claims the Egyptians knew of a 25,920-year zodiac cycle. But scholarship asserts that the Egyptians didn't even know of a solar cycle of zodiac and could never have known about a 25,920-year cycle. Removing Leo from the equation collapses Hancock's claim. Not a single hint in all of Egyptian history of a knowledge of precession. Hancock made up the precessional symbols in the pyramid text. No Egyptologists agree with him. He just found symbols that he could pass off to his readership that, hey man, these could be. He even said it that way. These could be precessional, the symbols of precession right here. They do not exist. In fact, there is no known ancient Egyptian text or source that links the Great Sphinx of Giza to the constellation Leo. Despite extensive research and translations of ancient Egyptian texts, no direct reference or association between the Sphinx and the constellation Leo has ever been found in the surviving literature or hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt. Without a Leo constellation, such a connection cannot exist. Graham Hancock asserts that the ancient Egyptians recognized the vernal equinox and that the constellation Leo, being a lion, was directly in alignment with the Sphinx, a lion at the vernal equinox 10,500 BC. But there is a problem here. Not only was there no Leo constellation to match the lion-like Sphinx, but scholars assert that there was no evidence the Egyptians regarded the vernal equinox at all. Ancient Egyptians had no use for the vernal equinox. The heliacal rising of Sirius, the dog star, around mid-July was one of the most important events in the Egyptian calendar, heralding the start of the new year and the flooding of the Nile. Only the star Sirius mattered because its appearance told them the floods of the Nile were coming. For Egypt in northern Africa, the vernal equinox played no importance. There was no reason to even regard it. With Leo anciently being the great sickle, and not a lion in ancient Egypt, then Graham Hancock's assertion that the Sphinx facing east places the date of its construction at 10,500 BC, it becomes ridiculous. There is no connection. If facing east was all a structure would have to do to be dated 10,500 BC, then Graham Hancock's claim also applies to every one of these famous structures. The Temple of Karnak complex located in Luxor, ancient Thebes, the entrance faces east to greet the sunrise. The Luxor temple is aligned with the Karnak complex and faces east. It must have been built in 10,500 BC. The Temple of Hatshepsut, situated at Deir el-Bahari, a mortuary temple that faces east across the Nile. The Temple of Amenhotep III, the Colossi of Memnon, they face east toward the Nile River and sunrise. The Temple of Bel in Syria, Palmyra. This ancient temple was oriented east-west in position so that its entrance faced the rising sun. The Temple of Bel in Syria must date to 10,500 BC, following Graham Hancock's logic. The Ziggurat of Ur in Iraq. The entrances of many ziggurats in Mesopotamia and the Near East face east toward the rising sun. Jerusalem's Temple Mount in Israel must date to 10,500 BC. Chalk it up to the Jews. They're ancient. The orientation of the ancient Jewish temples on the Temple Mount was eastward towards the Mount of Olives, symbolically facing the rising sun. Persepolis, Iran, the famous gate of all nations, aligns with the east. The Parthenon in Athens, Greece, this iconic temple on the Acropolis is orientated east-west, with its entrance facing east. The Temple of Apollo, the Delphic oracle in Greece, the temple is orientated to capture the light of the rising sun. The Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, Turkey, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, just like the Great Pyramid. The temple's entrance faces east. It must date to 10,500 BC. The Temple of Olympian Zeus, Athens, Greece. The massive temple's entrance faces east. Canterbury Cathedral in England, which is a Christian construction, but Christianity is ancient. It dates to 10,500 BC. This historic cathedral in England is orientated to the east. Every one of these structures face in the same direction as the Sphinx. So by Graham Hancock's logic, they should all date to 10,500 BC. But we know this is preposterous. We know the dates these were constructed. The reason we have to use Graham Hancock's logic to date them at 10,500 BC is because they're not connected any more to Leo than the Sphinx is. We just saw the ancient Egyptians made no association like this. There isn't anything in the historical record. It's going to look really interesting in these charts. What's really sad are all of the modern authors, podcasters, and content creators who copied Graham Hancock's mistakes. There never was an age of Leo because there never was an ancient Egyptian solar zodiac, and there was never any importance in Egypt attributed to the vernal equinox. This is an epic fail. Here's an interesting chart. And throughout this video presentation, we will be building on this chart. This is just the beginning of a chart that absolutely, completely collapses Graham Hancock's thesis. To the far left, you can clearly see how far 10,500 BC and 9,600 BC is for his Atlantis dating. Here's the Sphinx, here's Atlantis. This is Graham Hancock's version of history. Look at this chart, because there is a vast gulf of time where there is nothing until the development of the solar zodiac over here. 200 BC to 150 AD, Alexandrian era solar zodiac developed, Aries through Pisces. This is where Leo appeared. And there's 2025 and 2026 right there. This is to give you context of what we're talking about, this vast gulf of history in Graham Hancock's thesis. This is just the beginning of this chart. As this chart progresses, it's going to become increasingly ridiculous. So, adding to this chart, we now have Esna and Dendera zodiacs developed in Egypt, 200 BC to 17 AD. Look at the vast gulf of time of no Leo constellation. And yet, Leo over here dates the Sphinx at 10,500 BC. This is going to get so good. So, Hancock's 10,500 BC date for Leo Sphinx vernal equinox alignment is 10,300 years before Egypt had a zodiac, before Egypt had a Leo, before Egyptians even learned the significance of the vernal equinox. These facts alone collapse Hancock's Sphinx dating. The stars where the constellation Leo were not regarded as a lion to the ancient Egyptians, but the sickle. The Sphinx in Egypt in front of the Great Pyramids doesn't look like a sickle to me. In Search of Ancient Astronomies, E.C. Krupp. E.C. Krupp has also criticized Graham Hancock. Here's what we find in E.C. Krupp. He's an official astronomer. The most spectacular representation of the Egyptian sky is the ceiling from the Temple of Hathor at Dendera in Upper Egypt. The famous circular Dendera zodiac, now at the Louvre. All available evidence indicates that the concept of the zodiac was not native to Egypt. However, instead, it is believed that the zodiac was imported to Egypt from Mesopotamia at some late but unknown date. The earliest known representation of the zodiac in Egypt was found at the now destroyed Temple of Esna, also in Upper Egypt, which cannot be dated earlier than 246 BC, and was perhaps nearly 70 years more recent than that. Dendera zodiac right here shows the 36 decans, the circumpolar stars. It's hard to see. It's not easy to see, but nor is it. Here's an illustration of it, but nor is it really important. It's not important because it's really Greek based off Babylonian. It's not Egyptian. So, no zodiac in Egypt for 2,400 years of Egyptian history. As you can see right here on the far right, right here, Esna and Dendera zodiac dated over 400 years after Egypt fell to Assyria. Here's where they fell, 7th century BC. Assyria conquers the Nubian dynasty of Egypt. A lot of people get triggered when I talk about it. I debated somebody on X all night long. I debated this guy who's Afrocentric, who actually was trying to educate me and try to tell me that the history of the pharaohs was that they were sub-Saharan Black Africans, Nubians, and I overwhelmed him with so much data, he deleted all his arguments, and then he got off of X. He totally deleted his old profile. But my ex community knows about that debate, and I was showing that, look, man, I feel for you, but I'm gonna tell you now, in the historical record, the very first time your sub-Saharan Black Africans actually sat on the throne of Egypt was in the 8th century BC, and they didn't stay there long because Assyria conquered them. The very last free dynasty of Egyptian pharaohs was Nubian, and they were conquered by the Assyrians. And the Nubians fled back into deeper Africa and had never returned. So this 7th century BC Assyria begins the post-pharaonic Egypt. Egyptian free civilization ends. This is important because from this date in the 7th century BC, traditional pharaonic Egypt was over. Now it's subject to Assyria, to Persia, to Macedon, to Syria, and to the Greeks, the Macedonian Greeks, then to Rome. Egypt has never been free since the 7th century BC, because after Rome, they were conquered by Islam. So this is a really good chart to show that in 24 years of traditional Egyptian history, they didn't know a zodiac and they didn't know a constellation Leo. They didn't know a lion in the zodiac because the symbol was the great sickle. So, do you see all these famous buildings? I just named all these famous buildings. Every famous temple here and this Taco Bell by Graham Hancock's logic, should date to 10,500 BC because they all face east, just like the Sphinx. And because Leo was located on the horizon at the vernal equinox. But ancient Egyptians didn't know a Leo, it was the great sickle. So once you remove Leo from the equation, it makes Taco Bell to be founded in 10,500 BC. It's amazing. It's incredible. There it is right there, guys. There it is right there. If Graham Hancock didn't do anything in his life, he actually discovered the origin of Taco Bell. Blows the mind. Absolutely blows the mind. There it is. Taco Bell found. They should have a sign right there. Taco Bell founded 10,500 BC as per Graham Hancock. I'm losing IQ points about this drivel. So, look, guys, anybody can Google this. This isn't even information that's being withheld from the public. Anybody can Google this. The ancient Egyptians did not know a Leo constellation. It was the Great Sickle. Totally collapses Graham Hancock's whole narrative. Telling you guys, this shit goes deep. So we have covered one zodiac, only one. Oh, you know what? We got one. Here's a really good book too. Let me share my screen one more time. All right. Before we go to the Babylon, now we're going to move. We're leaving Egypt. There's no more to discuss about Egypt. We are done with Egypt. There is nothing out of ancient Egypt that supports Graham Hancock's claims. Nothing. So we're going to Babylon. Share my screen. Last thing about Egypt. This is an authoritative book on Hellenistic astrology. That's the name. That's the title. Hellenistic astrology, the study of fate and fortune. Chris Brennan. So in this book, this is what we read. Hellenistic astrology appears to have originated in Egypt during the late Hellenistic period, around the late 2nd or 1st century BC. However, it continued to be practiced for several centuries throughout the Mediterranean region as part of a continuous tradition that largely coincided with the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. In fact, virtually all of our surviving sources for the practice of Hellenistic astrology come from astrologers who lived in different parts of the Roman Empire between the 1st century AD and the 7th century AD. Thus, Hellenistic astrology could legitimately be referred to as Roman astrology. We're going to see some facts about that. Although adopting this designation would force us to neglect some of the important cultural connotations implied by having its origins in Hellenistic Egypt. So, there you have it. There you have it. We have covered Egypt and the origin of Taco Bell. Now, we need to take a good look at Babylonia. So I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see exactly what I've put together. All right. Babylonia. So, first facts right off the jump. Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian epics. You know them. Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish tablets of creation, the Karsag tablets, the Adapa epic, the Atrahasis epic, the Era epos. Nothing. No Zodiac. Rupert Gledow, in The Origin of the Zodiac, concerning the first zodiacs, which were lunar, wrote, "The zodiac was not created in an endeavor to establish in heaven signs for supposedly superstitious purposes, but was simply an early attempt to create a calendar based on observation." He then proceeds to explain that the system was based off of the passage of the moon into each sign. So all the original zodiacs were lunar. The most famous set of Babylonian astronomical tablets is called the MUL.APIN series. The name means plow star and refers to the constellation Triangulum, which lies between Aries and Andromeda, but apparently includes the Pleiades. These tablets, though only written about 700 BC, give the results of observations going back to about 1300 BC. In these tablets, the ecliptic had not yet become the principal line of reference. Why? My Archaix veterans know why. We've discussed this in other videos. Why around 700 BC would there be an issue about the ecliptic? Now, since the MUL.APIN series dates to about 700 BC and makes no mention of the zodiac, presumably it was not yet known, for it was not required, so long as the Babylonians were quite content with their lunar calendar. Tablet 1 of MUL.APIN has a list of 17 constellations in the path of the moon, though the celestial sphere was divided into 12 equal parts. They had not yet developed a 12 constellation zodiac. MUL.APIN, the stars who stand in the path of the moon, through whose region the moon during a month passes repeatedly and keeps touching them. That's actually written inside the MUL.APIN, that these constellations are in order as the moon touches them. These are the names of the constellations in MUL.APIN, ancient Babylonian stellosphere. The stars, that's what they're just called, the stars. And many academics believe it's actually a reference to the Pleiades. They believe that the Pleiades star system was so popular that all it had to be referenced as was the stars. So the stars, the bull of heaven, the true shepherd of Anu, the old man, the crook, the great twins, the crab, the lion, the furrow, the scales, the scorpion, pabblesag, the goatfish, the great one, the tails of the swallow, a goddess Anunitu, and the hired man. Also, the chariot and the field. Those are two more constellations of the older Babylonian zodiac. The first Babylonian zodiac was lunar and had 18 constellations. Of great interest is the fact that the constellation Leo was not originally a lion to the ancient Babylonians, but was called the Great Dog. That blew my mind. I saw nothing but Anubis when I read that statement. I'm going to read it again. Of great interest is the fact that the constellation Leo was not originally a lion to the ancient Babylonians, but was called the Great Dog. The most striking thing about these Babylonian irregular zodiacs is the absence of the ram. It suggests that the zodiac was not invented by the Babylonians alone. From MUL.APIN 700 BC to 300 BC, the Babylonian zodiac was slowly standardized. The hired man later became the sheep. This is Aries. The stars, the bull of heaven, the chariot were combined to become Taurus. The true shepherd of Anu, the great twins, were combined to become Gemini. Then the crab is Cancer. The lion was anciently the great dog, but it became Leo from the transition period before MUL.APIN to after MUL.APIN. Then there was the furrow. This became Virgo. The scales, of course, are Libra. The scorpion, of course, is Scorpio. Pabblesag is an ancient Babylonian god. This is our Sagittarius. The goatfish is, of course, Capricorn. The great one became Aquarius. And this is really, don't think for a second that the great one is a reference to Aquarius. It became Aquarius. I'm going to show you from another ancient zodiac what Aquarius was really referenced as, because the ancient Babylonians also called it by the same name. I just didn't want to give it away right here. When we get to the ancient British zodiac, you're going to know what the original Aquarius was. Then we have the field. The field and the tails constellations were combined to create Pisces. The earliest reference to the bull of heaven, the great twins, the scales, and the scorpion as constellations in Babylonia are found in the astrolabes dated to 1100 BC, which also mention many other constellations that are not associated to the modern zodiac. Robert Powell, in History of the Zodiac, on page 202, wrote that the earliest time the Babylonians were able to make observations or records on the stellar location of the equinoxes and solstices was from around the 5th century BC and onwards. Graham Hancock claims that we've been doing this for 12,000 years. John Steele, Department of Egyptology and Assyriology, Brown University, 2018, wrote a paper. And in that paper, he said, the development of the uniform zodiac took place in Babylonia in the late 5th century BC and was subsequently transmitted to other parts of the ancient world. This is Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry. Volume 18, number 4, 2018, pages 97 through 105. Not even the original solar zodiac, which came out of the lunar system of Babylonia, can help Graham Hancock's case. Again, his claims are an epic fail. Yeah, every time we review, we add more to our chart. So here it is. Here's the chart. All we did was add 450 BC, Babylonian zodiac developed from the older MUL.APIN 700 BC. This is what it looks like now. This is our chart. We're going to continue to build on this chart. You're going to see something amazing. Robert Graves in The White Goddess wrote, when and where the zodiac originated is not known, but it is believed to have gradually evolved in Babylonia from the 12 incidents in the life story of the hero Gilgamesh. His killing of the bull, his love passage with the virgin, his adventures with 2 scorpion men, the scales later took the place of one of them, and the deluge story corresponding with the water carrier. Calendar tablets of the 7th century BC bear this out. But the Epic of Gilgamesh is not really an ancient one. Many people triggered hearing that, oh man, Jason's claiming the zodiac, the solar zodiac is new. He doesn't know anything, man, because the Epic of Gilgamesh has it. No, academia is claiming that the signs that we have today in the solar zodiac that developed in Babylonia came from the incidents of the Epic of Gilgamesh story, and not the Epic of Gilgamesh story deriving from the constellations in the sky that had not yet been developed in the human mind. The Dance of Time, the origins of the calendar. That's Michael Judge. He wrote, from the earliest days, sky watchers recognized a set of 12 groups of constellations that kept company with the sun and planets. These constellations always traveled within an area extending a little above and a little below the ecliptic. In the 5th century BC, Babylonian sky watchers divided the ecliptic into 12 segments, each marked by one of these constellations. Most of them were named after real or fantastical animals, hence the term zodiac, which comes from a Greek word meaning circle of animals. By all accounts, we find zodiac is not old. It's not old like Graham Hancock says. This is David Davidson from 1924 explaining that the original zodiac was lunar. Ancient History, The Ages Before the World. This book's from the 1800s, citing Taylor. The Babylonians retained the primitive lunar months and lunar year, but in some branches of astronomy, they made remarkable progress. By the 7th century before our era, 700 BC, they were able to trace the course of the sun through the 12 constellations of the zodiac. Archaix veterans. Why? after thousands of years of watching the sky. Only after 700 BC were they able to determine the path of the sun through the constellations. Why that late date? You guys know, Archaix veterans know. The Dictionary of Dates. This is an old book too. Signs of the Zodiac. 12 signs on an imaginary zone in the heavens suggested by the 12 full moons in the course of a year, 560 BC. Even the books in the 1800s agree. Zodiac was never old. It was a slow development. The Greek Zodiac. The ancient Greeks did not have a solar zodiac, and all authorities agree that they inherited it from Babylon. No Minoan, Mycenaean, or any Greek references or art depicting the zodiac prior to 200 BC. Do you know how unusual that is? Do you have any idea how much Greek art we have in museums distributed all over the world and in private collections? And there isn't any ostraca. There's no pottery shards. There's no amphora. There's no friezes. There's nothing. If the zodiac was so important and known, it would have been painted in frescoes, on walls, exhibited in statuary, relics, nothing. No pillars, no monuments, no artifacts in tombs, no legends, no traditions. Strangely, in the whole of Greek mythology, the zodiac is not found anywhere. In no myths of heroes and gods, and there are hundreds. There's hundreds of Greek myths. It has been noted that the solar zodiac is not mentioned in Homer's Odyssey, in Homer's Iliad, in Hesiod's Works and Days, or in Hesiod's Theogony, in the writings of Theognis, Thucydides, Herodotus, or Thales. No Aries through Pisces zodiac is mentioned. So none of the Ionian scholars, the scientists, the naturalists of the Greek world, prior to the introduction from Babylon, knew of a zodiac. None of the traditions of the ancient oracles of Dodona, Didymus, Pythia, Delphi, or Olympus, no oracles convey any knowledge of the zodiac. Not one myth concerning the Sibyls mentions the zodiac. So Plato, writing in 365 BC, still had the zodiac ruled by gods and goddesses, and centuries were required to transition from divine powers to mechanical planets. It was the generation after Aristotle, the student of Plato, that astrology took the Greek world by storm. While the zodiac may have passed into Greece from Babylonia, the solar zodiac did not become fully developed until the height of the Roman influence over the Mediterranean. The modern zodiac is of signs named in Latin and planets named in Latin, and no Greek zodiacs have been found using the Greek names for the planets. The Greek names for the planets are Hermes, Aphrodite, Ares, Zeus, and Kronos, not Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn. Those are Latin. But the 12 signs of the modern zodiac are all Latin. Aries, the ram, is Latin. Taurus is Latin. Gemini is Latin. Cancer is Latin. Leo's Latin. Virgo's Latin. Libra's Latin. Scorpio's Latin. Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces are all Latin. And this version of the solar zodiac came into use sometime in the 1st century AD. In reviewing the data on the Greek zodiac, there is nothing here to help Graham Hancock's ever-weakening theory. Every time we finish a data set, we got to review our chart. Here it is. So we've added the Greek. Here it is, 300 to 200 BC, Greek zodiac developed from Babylon. We went further back. We went further forward in history, away from the 10,500 BC date of Graham Hancock. Well, we're not done. We got some more stuff to look at. 1911 is Encyclopedia Britannica. The history of the 7th sign is somewhat complicated. The earlier Greek writers, Eudoxus, Eratosthenes, Hipparchus, knew of only 11 zodiacal symbols, but made one do double duty, extending the scorpion across the 7th and 8th divisions. The balance, obviously indicating the equality of day and night, is first mentioned as the sign of the autumnal equinox by Geminus and Varro. That would be Marcus Varro. So this clearly shows that even during the Hellenistic period, the solar zodiac was still being developed. Let's see. Okay, so now, let's see. Method of observation by intervals of what we now call right ascension to the equal. That's not, okay. Projected upon the ecliptic, these were considerably unequal, and accordingly differed essentially from the Chaldean and the Greek signs. Their use was chiefly astrological, and their highly figurative names, the Great Splendor, Immense Void, the Fire of the Phoenix, had reference to no particular star. Okay, he's talking about the Chinese zodiac. We haven't got there yet. But remember, Fire of the Phoenix was long ago an ancient name for a house in the Chinese lunar zodiac. Chinese zodiac. It is an astonishing fact that the ancient Chinese and Babylonians have the same names for the constellations of the two bears, Draco, Orion, and Andromeda. But they don't have the same names for the 12 constellations of the ecliptic zodiac, Aries through Pisces. Why? Ancient Middle Kingdom Chinese concept of the heavens was having it divided into 4 places, called by the names of the 4 cardinal points. Chinese oracle bones of Anyang demonstrate that about 1300 BC, the Chinese divided the heavens into 4 palaces. This is where we get our later Christian tetramorph. The throne of God having four corners and four protective angels, and these go back to the ancient concepts of the 4 royal stars that created a divine cross across the heavens, and the pole star was at the top. And if you connected all 4 royal stars that form the cross of heaven with the pole star, you got the celestial pyramid. This is the original zodiac before signs were added to eventually become 12 signs. The change from 4 palaces astronomy to a circle of animals zodiac is believed to have happened from 500 to 100 BC in China. Rupert Gladow, in The Origin of the Zodiac on page 102, wrote, "In any case, the circle of animals is not the original Chinese system, and hardly anyone believes it can be traced there so early as the 6th century BC. There's that dating again after 700 BC. What happened in the 8th century BC? That's not relative to this video. Also, the circle being exclusively animal without any human figures. And thirdly, though it bears a partial resemblance to our zodiac, the Chinese circle of animals is patently not our zodiac and was not put to the same use. The Chinese zodiac was lunar, and the signs were of the rat, ox, tiger, the hare, the dragon, the serpent, the horse, the sheep, the monkey, the cock, the dog, and the boar. This was the Chinese circle of animals, and the ox, being in 2nd house, is the only parallel with the Aries through Pisces zodiac. This is a really interesting clue because remember, the original Babylonian zodiac had no Aries. It had no ram. But there are commonalities, though not necessarily in order. The serpent could be the Scorpio, the horse for Sagittarius, the archer, the sheep for Capricorn, and the monkey in place of the man with the urn, Aquarius. Well, we're going to see that that's not true either, because Aquarius is a recent development. Yeah, the age of Aquarius didn't exist. It doesn't exist. You're going to find out what age it really is. Also, the tiger for the lion of Leo. But the tiger is the 3rd in the Chinese lunar circle, and Leo is the 5th in the modern solar zodiac. So this still leaves the Chinese signs of the rat, hare, tiger, monkey, cock, dog, and boar as independent of any link to the Western solar zodiacal system. The Chinese lunar zodiac began with the rat, and there is no connection to Aries here. Any comparison between Grant Hancock's theory and the ancient Chinese zodiac critically harms any chance of him being correct. Share my screen here. So we now add the Chinese zodiac when it was developed. 400 to 100 BC Chinese zodiac developed right there. So it does not add to Graham Hancock's theory at all. It doesn't help him a bit. Vedic calendar. Vedic scholarship is clear that prior to the introduction of a solar zodiac, India maintained a lunar zodiac of 28 mansions, the nakshatras. This is from Calendars and Constellations of the Ancient World. In the Vedic period, including the Brahmanas and the Samhitas, the only heavenly bodies mentioned are the sun and moon. No constellations and no planets. Ancient India does have traditions of an older star knowledge, but it is always attached to the 7 rishis, the Great Bear, and Canopus, as well as the Pleiades. The Vedic zodiac of India was completely lunar and involved the moon passing through the 28 nakshatras, the lunar mansions. It was simply observational. Astronomers observed the moon's passage through the night sky. As with the other ancient civilizations prior to the appearance of the solar zodiacs, the Vedic lunar zodiac had at its beginning the rising of the Pleiades. All of the great epics of India, Ramayana, Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, no zodiacs are mentioned. Nowhere in Sanskrit, Vedic, Hindu, Puranic, Brahmanic literature is there a reference to the precessional cycle of ages or a 25,920-year cycle of the zodiac. In researching Vedic astrology, it is a hard truth that almost nothing exists from before the Alexandrian contact period of the 3rd century BC. There are only fragments of the Garga Samhita, too corrupt and incomplete to be safely translated, and one other text titled the Yotisha Vedanga, which is entirely concerned with the calculating the times of the full and new moons and makes no mention of planets. Prior to contact with the Greeks, there is no evidence that India knew a solar zodiac. Nor was there any knowledge of precession in India prior to Alexandrian contact. The Surya Siddhanta purports to be ancient, but the truth is that it is a 6th century AD composition from the early Muslim period, a compendium of ancient Indian astronomical information seemingly all derived after contact with Alexandrian scholars in the 3rd and 2nd century BC. So basically what scholarship has found is that the core element of the Surya Siddhanta is from traditions going back to the 1st millennium BC. But when it was rewritten sometime before the 6th century BC, all this new zodiacal material was put in there. But it's Hellenistic, and this is where it comes from the Greeks. So we get this. It's called an interpolation. We get these all the time. The entire Christian world is built off interpolations, using older text and including newer material in there in the hopes that you can pass it off as more ancient. The Greco-Roman astronomy and astrology was brought back to India from Africa, and Indian books, brought back to India from Africa, and Indian books became filled with an admixture of Indian mythology and tradition and the Western asterisms and knowledge rewritten for Indian consumption. But it would take centuries for the sciences to be adopted widely. As late as AD 80, the Hindu still believed the moon was farther away than the sun. It would be as late as the 5th century AD before India would produce any great and renowned astrologers. The oldest Sanskrit text on astrology is from 270 AD. It's titled Yavanjakara, or Sayings of the Greeks. Montucla wrote that the Hindu zodiac was borrowed from the Greek. In his PhD thesis on the origin of the zodiac, Rupert Gladow wrote that the solar zodiac was imported into India from the Greeks in Alexandrian times. In Anacalypsis, Godfrey Higgins in 1833 on page 3 wrote, "The zodiac is not of Indian extraction, but of Greek, because the animals of which it is composed are not native to India." That was a pretty good observation. Greco-Babylonian astronomy was introduced into India in the 2nd century BC. It is particularly damning that the two leading experts on the occult and mysticism both agree that the antiquity of the zodiac is highly controversial. Helena Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine admits, this is 1887, the antiquity of the zodiac in Egypt is much doubted, and it is denied point blank with regard to India. Secret Doctrine, page 438. Manly P. Hall, in an encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian philosophy, started his entire chapter on the zodiac with, "The antiquity of the zodiac is much in dispute." Looking at India for an ancient solar zodiac, Graham's theory gets no support. So let's check out our chart. Here it is. We have now added the Indian. So look at the chart. Look how it's developing. You can see when each culture received earlier versions of the solar zodiac and built from them to create their own zodiacs. Here it is. Here's the progress of development right here. And look how far back in time it is from way back here, 10,500 BC, when Taco Bell was founded. Encyclopedia Britannica, again, 1911. The knowledge of the solar zodiac thus turned to account for the dualistic purposes was undoubtedly derived from the Greeks. By them, too, it was introduced into Hindustan. Aryavata, about the beginning of the Christian era, reckoned by the same signs as Hipparchus. They were transmitted from India by Buddhist missionaries to China, but remained in abeyance until the Jesuit reform of Chinese astronomy in the 7th century. The old Indian names of the months were derived from them. Their existence was presupposed in the entire structure of Hindu ritual and science. They do not, however, obtain full recognition in Sanskrit literature until the Brahmana period, 7th or 8th century BC. There's that date again. The Rig Veda contains only one allusion to them, where it is said that Soma is placed in the lap of the nakshatras. It's only talking about the lunar zodiac. It's not even a reference to the solar zodiac. Nakshatras, nak right there is ancient Aryan for night. Kshatras would have to be constellations or star groups, but NAK is night. Nakshatras. Calendars and constellations of the ancient world. Okay, in the most ancient Sanskrit work in existence, the purely Indian Rig Veda, containing no Grecian taint, the 12-fold divisions of the zodiac appear to be unknown. This opinion as to the Rashis, or constellations of the solar zodiac, is so generally adopted that the age of any Sanskrit work in which mention of these Rashis occurs is at once, no matter what its claims to antiquity may be, set down as not earlier than the comparative modern date of 300 BC. Amazing. The Grecian introduction of the 12-fold zodiac into India, 300 BC. The date 570 AD for the fixation of the initial point of the Indian zodiacs, and for the commencement of the history of Indian astronomy. Can't make this stuff up. Godfrey Higgins, this is originally 1833. My copy is 1836. The signs of the zodiac are not any of them remarkable for being connected with objects of Indian nature. The 28 Hindu lunar mansions and the asterisms are almost all named after objects peculiarly Hindu. This raises a strong presumption against the solar zodiac being of Hindu invention. If the solar zodiac had been of Hindu or African growth, the elephant and camel would have been found in there. I love Godfrey Higgins. His books are huge. I have both of them. They're gigantic. Mr. Maurice has observed that the signs of the zodiac cannot be of Egyptian origin because they are not adapted to the order in which the seasons succeed each other in Egypt. Remember, I told you guys the Egyptians in northern Africa had no use of the vernal equinox at all. It had nothing. It had no utility to them. They watched the dog star. That's what they watched, Sirius. This is why it's called the land of Siriad in ancient texts. They watched Sirius because once they saw the heliacal rising of Sirius, they knew relief was coming. They knew waters from the Nile were going to overflood and fill their fields, and they've already planted everything. The vernal equinox told them nothing. Graham Hancock's whole theory about the Sphinx and Leo is a complete farce. It's a complete farce that thousands of people have copied. Ancient American zodiacs are not lunar or solar, but based off the movements of Venus and were day count systems based off periods of 13 and 20 days. The solar zodiac was thus 18 months of 20 days each, making a 360-day year. The American signs have no crossover with the Aries through Pisces Western zodiac. These are Mayan, Toltec, and Aztec, all of Central America and North America, but of the North American nomadic Native Americans like the Navajo and the Tsauge, the Cherokee, all the Great White, the Sioux, the Apache, the Iroquois nations, there is not a hint of a knowledge of a zodiac among the North American nomadic peoples. So we're done with that. We're going to go straight into ancient Britain now. A lot of you didn't know about ancient Britain's zodiac. Ancient Britain, K.E. Maltwood, in A Guide to Glastonbury's Temple of the Stars, 1950, shows that the effigy mounds of England represent from the sky the circumpolar constellations in northern heavens to the ecliptic. Many of these earthworks represent the zodiacal signs, as well as Draco, Crater, the Cup, Orion, and the Pleiades. The earthworks seem to be associated initially with the moon, and earthworks are positioned as if sightlines were made to watch the Pleiades. A massive sky-facing lunar calendar dating to about 4,000 years ago. This is K.E. Maltwood in A Guide to Glastonbury's Temple of the Stars. Later, this is way later. Later, the effigies had buildings put on top of them, and the earthworks became loosely associated with the sun. Maltwood further links the 12 houses of the early English zodiac to the 12 Knights of the Round Table of King Arthur, dated 6th century AD. At this time, Christianity was firmly rooted in England. The earthworks may have begun as Druidic, but they ended up as a part of the Christian network of chapels and churches. What is fascinating is that there is no Aquarius in this round table or in the earthworks facing the sky. Instead of Aquarius, the early English or the British had the Phoenix, just like the Chinese, the fire of the Phoenix, which later became their dragon house for the moon. The ancient British zodiac, instead of Aquarius, has Phoenix. Tradition claims this Phoenix at Glastonbury stood in a nest of cinnamon. My Archaix veterans know the connection here. This is K.E. Maltwood in A Guide to Glastonbury's Temple of the Stars. Here's the original chart. Right here. Let's go through it. There's 200 BC to 150 AD, Alexandrian era solar zodiac developed, Aries through Pisces. Next, the only zodiacs Egypt ever had were 4 to 500 years after Egypt had already fallen to foreign powers and influences. Here's the next chart we saw. Look at that circle. 10,500 BC is too far back. It's 10,300 years before Egypt had a zodiac. And yet, the thesis of Hancock requires that Egypt had a zodiac. It requires that Egypt had a Leo. It requires that the Egyptians regarded the vernal equinox. And we have found, point of fact from scholarship, that none of these are true. The Egyptians didn't care about the vernal equinox. The Egyptians had no solar zodiac. And the Egyptians sure as hell didn't have a Leo constellation. It was the Great Sickle. Epic fail for Graham Hancock. Here's the development of the chart. Here it keeps going. So, 450 BC Babylonian zodiac developed from older MUL.APIN 700 BC of 18 constellations. That's what that little circle is. This little circle right here, is academia's official conclusions that I just went through, showing the development of the solar zodiac from the earlier lunar zodiacs. This is the 600-year period of development right there, that little tiny circle. Here's 2025 and 2026. So this is 450 BC. That's what that circle is, to 150 AD. 450 BC Babylonian zodiac developed from older MUL.APIN 700 BC of 18 constellations. The Chinese independent zodiac, Greek from Babylonian, Egyptian from Greek, Indian from Greek, to full Aries through Pisces in the 1st century AD. Totals, well, it's actually 2nd century AD, but it totals 600 years to full maturity in Tetrabiblos and Almagest of Ptolemy. Full maturity of solar zodiac is 10,640 years after Hancock's 10,500 BC date for Leo Sphinx vernal equinox alignment, and 10,300 years before Egypt had a zodiac. Graham Hancock's theory is embarrassing, seeing this data. Here, look at this chart. Same little 600-year circle right here. Do you see the yellow circle? The yellow circle is the 3,100 years of recorded human history from all civilizations, ancient civilizations, to the development of the Aries through Pisces zodiac. That yellow circle concerns everything we've ever discovered in Ubaid, in Sumerian, in Akkadian, in all the cuneiform. Everything that we've ever discovered in hieroglyphic, in hieratic, in demotic, everything we have ever discovered in what's the Minoan? Minoan linear A, Minoan linear B, everything here in the entire realm of the human historical record, this yellow circle encompasses everything right here, to that little 600-year period right there where the solar zodiac Aries through Pisces was developed. Look how small this yellow circle is compared to the distance to Graham Hancock's 10,500 BC. You don't have to imagine it because I drew it for you. Hancock's 10,500 BC date is 7,500 years before the start of any recorded civilizations and 10,050 years before beginning of modern zodiac development. This is 8,000 years of no written records. It's too much. So, the year everything changed, 713 BC. Like I said, we're going to go through this. So these first two sections are something we've already gone through, but we're not going to go through them ad nauseum. They have whole entire video sets dedicated to these two topics. So we're just barely going to scratch the surface. The old world year was 360 days. My Archaix veterans know I've already made my case. I'm also going to tell you the uniformitarian arguments against that and how stupid they are. Solar zodiac Aries through Pisces developed between 550 BC to 150 AD. This is still triggering people. There's a lot of people still not coming around to accepting it. I'm going to show you the charts. They're irrefutable. These are the results not of Jason telling you something, but of referring to the men who got their PhDs and wrote their theses on the origin of the solar zodiac. Academic mystery of absence of ancient precession. This is going to be some new data. Yeah, precession is real. There is a precession of the equinox. It's measurable today. But that doesn't mean it's always been here, because it concerns a three-body problem. And that three-body problem didn't exist in the ancient world. It's a recent development. You'll find out it started in 713 BC. The year that changed everything. It is the year of confusion. It is 713 BC, as we'll see. It is after 713 BC that it became necessary for civilizations all over the world to create a solar calendar. Previously, all the calendars were lunar. Adding 5 days and the start of solar reckoning. Uniformitarians, they have these really weird, convoluted arguments as to why 5 days were added to the calendar. It is so stupid. We're gonna go over it. Then we have a whole section here you need to hear about. It's all new data, guys. The world after 713 BC. And then the keystone to this presentation is the Mayan calendar and what it really means, what it really meant to the Maya, and how it puts everything together. It is the key to the chaos. This video was recently done. If you have any doubts whatsoever, if you would like to critique, if you would like to debate it, all you have to do is watch this presentation. It is overwhelming amount of data that prior to 713 BC, the world only knew 1 year, and it was 360 days. And it's not because they were stupid and didn't know it was 365 days. I'm going to show you the evidence of that dumb argument too, why it collapses. But this video here has the full data set. There's no more information to add to it. There's no reason to go ad nauseum in this presentation to cover this over. We don't need to. This video covered everything you need to know that every civilization in the world only knew a 360-day year. And they divided the celestial sphere into 12 compartments. And the movement of the moon through each of these houses was the calendar of the ancient world. There were some civilizations that had subdivided this into 36 sections called decans. But all of this was lunar. The academic, this is part 3, but it's actually the first part of this presentation. As I said, the other 2 were just covering previously exhausting data sets. This is a completely separate data set, and this is actually the first section of this presentation. Academic mystery of the absence of ancient precession. Shall we begin? So, Giorgio de Santillana, I don't know how to say it, Santillana, and Hertha von Deschend in 1969 wrote Hamlet's Mill. It's become a very famous book. It's an essay on investigating the origins of human knowledge and its transmission through myth that introduced the idea that ancient structures and events could be dated using the precession of the equinox. The scientific and the academic community dismissed the book as nonsense. There's many reasons why they did that. Academia has shown that no ancient precession acknowledging civilizations existed from 4000 BC to 100 BC. So they knew the premise of this book was bullshit. But understanding what precession is believed to be is critical to understanding why it was not discovered by any civilizations until after the 8th century BC. People automatically assume precession just is, and it's been here for hundreds of thousands of millions of years. It's not true. It is the effect. It is the result of something that happened. a disruption of a relationship. I'm going to show you. So, precession of the equinoxes is a wobble in the Earth's axial motion due to the gravitational pull of both the sun and the moon. This is the uniformitarian model that is given to us. So we're going to go with that. We're going to go with their models in order to take it apart. It is a theory that this wobble creates a retrograde motion, precession, that causes the celestial sphere to move backward 1 degree every 72 years, or 30 degrees every 2,160 years. This motion also affects the axis that pointed to the ancient eye of the dragon, the star Alpha Draconis, otherwise known in the ancient world as Thuban, the ancient pole star. The earliest known, well, now our pole star is Polaris. It's nowhere near Thuban. The earliest known reference to Polaris as the pole star dates back to the 5th century. Stobaeus, a Greek philosopher, 2 centuries after the 8th century BC event that we're talking about in this video. So this should say 5th century BC. But anyway, it's the first mention of Polaris. Ancient civilizations did not mention Polaris as the pole star. It was Thuban. And there are no myths, no traditions. There's nothing talking about the time between, which would be 2,000 and something years, the time between Thuban and Polaris. So Hipparchus of Nicaea, about 150 BC, widely recognized as the first person to discover the precession of the equinox, but this is a claim ex post facto. Unfortunately, we are also told that his writings are lost. The claim that Hipparchus discovered the precession of the equinox comes 200 and something years later. So it's by Claudius Ptolemy in his work Almagest. He provided us the story of Hipparchus, who had noticed that the stars had changed position when comparing ancient charts. Neither of these men mentioned a 26,000 year or similar cycle. Indian astronomical texts like the Surya Siddhanta, Islamic scholars, and European astronomers of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, translating the old Greek and Roman texts, found no references to a 26,000 year zodiacal cycle or a 25, 9,020 years of the zodiac. In fact, not one reference to the word precession can be found in any of these periods. This is a specialist now. Rupert Gleadow, in The Origin of the Zodiac, wrote, "When the zodiac was first invented, precession was not imagined, and the sun was thought to cross the equator in the constellation Aries always at the same time. In fact, the point of crossing moves westward at a speed of 50.2 seconds of arc per year. Hence, it takes about 2,000 years to pass through a constellation and nearly 26,000 to make a tour of the sky." Rupert Gleadow, in The Origin of the Zodiac, wrote, 2,000 years ago, there may have been half a dozen men on Earth who could locate the equinox, but there is no reason to think there was anyone at all at 1000 BC. This is very interesting. Those astrologers today who maintain that the zodiac is incredibly ancient and that it has always been measured from the equinox are evidently up against a difficult problem. The vernal equinox of the Babylonians was different than that of the Greeks, often by 15 degrees. It took centuries for the equinox to be pinpointed. Sidereal, astronomical zodiac, tropical, all long stages of development from the 5th century BC to 200 AD. Note, here are specialists telling you that the solar zodiac was developed after the 8th century BC. Robert Powell, in History of the Zodiac, on page 202 wrote that the earliest time the Babylonians were able to make observations or records on the stellar location of equinoxes and solstices was from around the 5th century BC onwards, meaning it took about 200 years of direct observations in order to begin recording it. Rupert Gladow, in The Origin of the Zodiac, writing about astrologers 2,000 years ago, wrote, although precession had been discovered, it was not at once adopted and taken seriously by users of the zodiac. The Sumerians published star catalogs and divided the day into seconds, minutes, hours, and the sky into 360 degrees, but they didn't know of precession. They developed this very complex systems that we've talked about, like the Venus almanacs and the sexagesimal system. So the Vedic writers had calculations running into the 7th digits, and they knew nothing of precession. The Mayan published advanced Venus almanacs, but didn't know of precession. In fact, precession would have become obvious by the gradual change of the date of the heliacal risings of important stars. But the Babylonians did not discover precession. This is extremely important for people to realize, because measuring the heliacal rising of Sirius is what the entire ancient Egyptian lunar calendar was all about. Also measuring the heliacal rising of Venus was what the MUL.APIN of ancient Babylon was all about. If precession was a thing before the 8th century, it would have been noted in all the cuneiform. It would have been noted in all the Egyptian sightings. Not a hint of it. This is from academia, not from Jason of Archaix. Academia shows nothing prior to the 8th century, gives us any clue that they knew of anything about precession, because they didn't write about it. So Ernest Busenbark wrote in Symbols, Sex, and the Stars that the use of mathematics and astronomical calculations in Babylon first appeared about the 8th century BC and thereafter advanced rapidly. What? Why is the MUL.APIN in the Venus almanacs in the three ways, in the 3 paths of the stars in the MUL.APIN far more complex the further we go back than they are in the 5th century, when they seem to be starting over like children with an entire different system, now using the sun as a point of reference instead of the moon? What the hell happened? I don't have to tell you. I'm going to read it for you. Precession was the 3rd discovered motion of Earth, after the far more obvious daily rotation and annual revolution. Precession is caused. So basically what it just said is there are 3 movements of the Earth. The 3rd one was the very last one discovered. The first one is obvious, and it is the day. It's the first movement of the Earth. It's called the diurnal system. The second one is the year. This is the annual system. So the 3rd movement of the world, which is actually, in the Archaix model, only the sky moves. We're not moving. We're stationary. So, this is for those new to my channel, this is all about the simulacrum, and I can't catch you up. I just can't catch you up. You're just going to have to go ride with it. So precession is caused by the gravitational influence of the sun and the moon acting on Earth's equatorial bulge. Now we're getting somewhere. Precession is caused by the gravitational influence of the sun and the moon. Now they're saying it's acting on Earth's equatorial bulge. I don't care if it's true or not. The only thing I care about is that they're telling us that the wobble is because of a relationship between the terrasphere, Earth, the sun, and the moon. Now things begin to make sense. That's where the wobble comes from, and the wobble causes precession. Precession wasn't known prior to the 8th century BC, but it's a fact after the 8th century BC, and precession is directly connected to a relationship between the Earth, sun, and moon. I don't have to tell you nothing. You're going to have your own aha moments. The fact that there are traditions of a time from before the moon appeared means there was a time when the wobble would have been different or non-existent. No moon to exert a pull. Remember, in Immanuel Velikovsky, Hans Hobiger and Hans Bellamy, in all their research, they talk about the pre-Selenites, the people that were here before the moon appeared. And when the moon appeared, there was a cataclysm. It's called the capture flood, the capture of Luna. So prior to the moon being here, was there a precession? Well, let's find out. So the fact that precession was undiscovered until Hipparchus means that we are to look for an event involving the sun and moon that would have created this effect. So now we move to the next section. The year that changed everything. This is the year of confusion in the ancient world. So the son of Sargon II, King Sennacherib of Assyria, came against Judah and against Jerusalem. This is in the Old Testament. King Hezekiah was afraid and sick. He had an illness as well, and he consulted the prophet Isaiah, this being his 14th year of reign. In the temple, the prophet told the king not to worry, for God would send a blast upon the Assyrians, and Jerusalem would be saved. Though Sennacherib would escape, he would be killed by in his own land. We'll get to that in a minute. So this is in the biblical record. You're about to see that Assyrian records also comport. These Assyrian records confirm the situation. Assyrian Annals of Sennacherib confirms the biblical record that King Hezekiah did not surrender, nor was he taken. In Sennacherib's annals, we read, "As to Hezekiah, he did not submit to my yoke. I laid siege to 46 of his strong cities, walled forts, and to the countless small villages in their vicinity, and conquered them by means of a well-stamped earth ramps and battering rams. I drove out 200,150 people. Himself I made a prisoner in Jerusalem." In 2 Chronicles 32:24 through 31, the prophet Isaiah said to King Hezekiah, this sign shalt thou have of the Lord, that the Lord will do the thing that he hath spoken. Shall the shadow go forward 10 degrees or go back 10 degrees? And Hezekiah answered the prophet, it is a light thing for the shadow to go down 10 degrees. Nay, but let the shadow return backward 10 degrees. And Isaiah the prophet cried unto the Lord, and he brought the shadow 10 degrees backward, by which it had gone down in the dial of Ahaz. According to the Bible, particularly in 2 Kings 19:35, Isaiah 37:36, and 2 Chronicles 32:21, an angel of the Lord miraculously struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one night as they besieged Jerusalem. This divine intervention was in response to prayers from King Hezekiah, who sought protection from God. Now, Isaiah 37:36, then the angel of the Lord went forth and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh, the capital city of Assyria. And it came to pass, as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, that Adremelech and Sherezer, his sons, smote him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Armenia. And Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his stead. The prophet Isaiah showed King Hezekiah that the shadow on the sundial of Ahaz had ceased moving. And this was a sign from God that Jerusalem would be delivered. Then, instead of moving forward, it retrograded 10 degrees. This is important because while going backward 10 degrees, it should have been moving forward 10 degrees. Therefore, this is a loss of 20 degrees. And when the shadow moved forward again, there would have been additional attrition, and the shadow would never have been able to catch up to where it was supposed to be. Something very unusual happened that stretched out time. This is not a shortening of days, as seen in the Revelation judgments, but a lengthening of time itself. As this was happening, a lightning blast from the sky incinerated 185,000 Assyrian soldiers under Sennacherib. This may have been a flux tube phenomenon. This lightning from heaven caused the death of 185,000 Assyrians, like a plasma discharge, an event also mentioned by the Babylonian historian priest Berosus, according to Josephus in Antiquities 10:14. The account of Sennacherib approaching Egypt, having his entire army destroyed by a plague of blast from the sky, is also found in the histories of Herodotus 2,400 years ago. His book's called The Histories. In the Apocalypse of Baruch, the text reads, "Angel of God speaking, and at that time I burned their bodies within, but their raiment and arms I preserved outwardly." The people of Judah later visited the spot and found the entire host had been vaporized in their armor. King Sennacherib, camping apart from the main host, survived, and he and his entourage escaped back to Nineveh, where he was assassinated by his own sons, who themselves escaped into exile. According to the Apocalypse of Baruch, holy angels led by Ramael were unleashed by God to slay the Assyrians. In fact, the Baruch text is narrated by the very angels who performed the deed. The 185,000 soldiers in their armor with their gear and weapons were a perfect antenna. The Israelites later visited the spot and discovered that the entire, read that part, were vaporized in their armor, and they received dignitaries from Babylon requesting to know if the temple records had anything at all about such an event occurring in the past. Sennacherib's assassination is also confirmed in Assyrian records, and his youngest son Esarhaddon, who succeeded him. Esarhaddon was the father of Ashurbanipal. Remember, he's the famous historian king of Assyria. He boasted that his priest taught him how to read the writings from before the flood. A Syrian cuneiform inscription that mentions the beginning of a new world age in the days of Sennacherib. So world ages are like the mandate of heaven in China changing. When that event occurs, it means something in the sky was altered. This is the only meaning it ever had in China. And it was called the change of the mandate of heaven. And it's when the people forcibly made emperors step down. And sometimes noble and the families of the emperors were forced into exile. Yeah, it's something, the emperor was in charge of maintaining the order of the cosmos. And if the order of the cosmos, anything happened in the sky that wasn't supposed to happen, yeah, the emperor got it. So this is the same concept as in Assyria. And it's the same concept in India. They called them yugas. But here they are in Sumer, they were called nurs, as we've talked about. And here in Assyria, it was just a new world age. A new world age began in the last days of Sennacherib. Why? What happened in the sky that made the Assyrians change their whole chronology into ending a period epic and starting a brand new age? James Ussher in 1657 in the Annals of the World is precise in dating the sun retrograding 10 degrees and the death of the 185,000 Assyrians heading toward Jerusalem to 713 BC. In an old book from 1871 called Synchronology, of the principal events in sacred and profane history by Stephen Hawes, we find that the miracle of Hezekiah happened in the year 713 BC. Biblical chronologist Dr. Stephen Jones, author of The Secrets of Time, also dates the retrograding 10 degrees in the year 713 BC. The prolific researcher, historian, archaeologist, and writer Ignatius Donnelly, in his book Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, a world-famous book from the 1800s, he wrote that an Assyrian cycle began in 712 BC. This means the old world of Assyria ended in 713 BC. So here's some famous art concerning 713 BC. The angel of the Lord appears in the sky, and 185,000 Assyrian soldiers die in an instant. It even says at the bottom, angel of the Lord vanquishing the armies of Sennacherib. That's what it says right there at the bottom. Battle of the Old Testament, Old Latin. So artwork from Latin period. Here's another famous art. It's also about the Assyrian soldiers being vaporized outside of Jerusalem. Angel of the Lord appears and all the Assyrians die. Just some curious old art. Here's a biblical chronology right here with 713 BC, Assyrian army destroyed, 14th year of Hezekiah. This is when the miracle happened. There it is, 713 BC. Yeah, Marty Leeds of Gnostic Academy was going through a rant, and he was telling his community that nothing happened in 713 BC. There's no way in hell that any of these things happened in 713. He's just going on a rant. He's just really envious and real juvenile. His arguments against things that are quite obvious. How's this for a really interesting deal? You can Google this. The year 713 BC was the first year of the pre-Julian Roman calendar. It was known as year 41 ab urb condita, AUC. Numa Pompilius, king of Rome, reformed the Roman calendar in this year, introducing January and February and adding 5 days to the calendar. What? WTF? Can't make this shit up. I'm not lying to you guys. I'm not making stuff up. It's all verifiable. All very verifiable. 713 BC. So what's this old chronology here? Annals of the World, 713 BC. What does it say happened? Oh, the sun retrograded 10 degrees. There it is, right there. You can't make this shit up. Old book. Just can't make this shit up. So it is absolutely my method of research and presentation that to not bring something to your attention unless I can do it from multiple different vantage points. So we've seen the chronological. This is chronological right here. It's biblical chronology. It's chronology of academics, of different people with doctorates. This is what they put together. And when we look at what they put together, we see 713 BC, something major happened. But now let's look at the historical record and find out. Let's find out more details about what they claim happened at this time and how they dated it and what effect did it have on our timekeeping systems. Yeah, if anything is true, I tell you guys this all the time, if anything is true, it can always be seen from multiple different vantage points. A 7th century BC Assyrian tablet reads that the moon was obstructed in its way. Day and night it was handicapped in its august station it did not stand. So the moon disappeared. Where the mansion it was supposed to be in, the moon wasn't there. From Assyria, from where the Assyrians could see from their vantage point of the celestial sphere, the moon was not in the sky where it was supposed to be. Not only had the sun retrograded 10 degrees for a loss of 20 degrees over that area of the world, but that area of the world left us a cuneiform Assyrian tablet saying that the moon disappeared. Not that it just vanished and something blocked it, but it was not in its station. So, because of the duration of the obscuration, the Assyrian text itself continues, and it reads, "It could not mean an eclipse of the moon." This is cited by Immanuel Velikovsky, the bane of Graham Hancock. Bane meaning the curse, anathema. Yeah, Graham Hancock will not go through Immanuel Velikovsky's research at all because it completely collapses every single thing in Fingerprints of the Gods. Velikovsky is revealing that the ancient accounts explain that both the sun and moon had deviated from their stations. For centuries, the Babylonians were holding to a New Year's festival. Pay attention. Babylon, for centuries before the 8th century, held to a New Year's festival, but something happened. And in the reign of Sennacherib and Esarhaddon, for a period of 20 years, the New Year's festival in Babylon was not held. You can't hold a Babylonian New Year's festival when it's the moon that marks the beginning of the festival. Something very, very unusual happened. For 20 years, the Babylonians and Assyrians didn't know what to do. Everything that they had built there, all the calendars they had ever developed were lunar, but the moon was not there. In the days of Ashurbanipal, the planetary movements and all astronomical figures were recalculated. Ashurbanipal is the son of Esarhaddon. Esarhaddon took the throne after Sennacherib was murdered by 2 of his other sons. So you see, this is chronographical. It's giving us the exact time when this was exactly what would happen. In the days of Ashurbanipal, this is now the 600s BC. The planetary movements and all astronomical figures were recalculated. Velikovsky states that the order of the world changed in the 8th or 7th century BC. That's huge. It's huge for a civilization that had MUL.APIN. We just did a video on MUL.APIN. It gives you the full data set on Babylonian astronomy, how it developed, when it started, why it started, what they claimed happened that started their lunar calendars, and how all their lunar calendars collapsed at the same time because something happened. Here we have the Assyrians and Babylonians went ahead and revised their entire astronomy behind an event that happened in the days of Sennacherib. We also have this report from Egypt. In the 15th year of Sosinc III of the Libyan dynasty of Egypt, in the 8th century BC, a great prodigy appeared in the heavens, plunging the moon into shadow. Heaven devoured the moon, and the land was angry. Angry land is earthquakes. After this, the high priest, a man named Osorkon, not the same as the former king of Osorkon, instituted a new calendar. A new calendar would indeed be necessary if the sun and moon had both moved from their stations. The changing of a calendar is no light matter. cultures and civilizations changed their calendars often to commemorate significant events. But these changes did not apply to outsiders, to other kingdoms and peoples. And this event, while depicted in the Bible, seems to have been noticed by the entire world. The Assyrians declared a new age. The Assyrians and Babylonians saw that the moon, the foundation of their calendar, had deviated from its station. Hezekiah saw the sun moved out of its place, and a thunderbolt vaporized an Assyrian army. And interestingly, Hezekiah, listen to this, King Hezekiah went down in history as instituting a new calendar. Of all the kings of Judah, why was it Hezekiah? Because he was the one ruling in 713 BC and afterward. It's all starting to make sense. Next section, a solar calendar is developed. Again, if something is true, you're always going to see it from multiple different vantage points. So here's the fourth vantage point in this presentation. This is the fourth section that we're seeing the same thing but from different points. In the year 713 BC, King Romulus still reigned over Rome, which was founded in 753 BC. According to Plutarch, in Romulus's reign, the months of the calendar became confused, and the people invented monthly systems in an effort to keep to a 360-day year. What? Ancient Rome had a calendar, and all of a sudden the months became confused. But in that confusion, there was an effort to try to force fit a new sky into the older sky model of 360 days. Didn't work. This alludes that the year had changed, and there were efforts to keep a 360-day year despite the alteration, but this caused confusion. After Romulus, it was Numa Pompilius who ruled Rome. Plutarch wrote in the Life of Numa that King Numa reformed the calendar after the period of Romulus when there was a confusion about the months. Lucius Piso, in his annals, wrote that King Numa Pompilius called lightning down from heaven through an incantation, as related by Pliny in Natural History, a 2,000-year-old text. This association would be to the memory of the thunderbolt that vaporized the Assyrian army. Roman records convey that Numa Pompilius changed the calendar in Rome from 360 days to 365 days a year. We have further evidence that the alteration of the sun's course occurred in February, and that the lightning blasts were part of a greater phenomenon. The Februm was a sacred purification ceremony in Rome, conducted at this time in the year. Our modern calendar has January and February as the first and second months of the year, but they are actually the 11th and 12th months, and the newly added 5 days were added to February. Evidence of this is the fact that today's calendar, September, October, November, and December, are the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th months. However, their Latin names are 7, 8, 9, and 10. 10, December, Deci. The added 5 days were called the Terminalia, the bad luck days or unlucky days, and identify the 5 added days to the year of 360 days from the events of 713 BC. Velikovsky wrote, all over the world, we find that there was at some time the calendar of 360 days, and that at some later date, about the 7th century before the present era, 5 days were added at the end of the year as days over the year, or the days of nothing. This is huge. It overturns the uniformitarian, pompous, looking down their nose assertions that all the ancients were they just didn't know that there was 365 days a year. 365 days a year. Year goes back hundreds of thousands of years. It's never changed for millions of years. We've had a 365-day year. They don't know. They just didn't. They were simple. They were simple, but they had complex Venus almanacs that these same uniformitarians can't even decipher. They were so simple, yet they produced an amazing sexagesimal system that also incorporated a decimal system at the same time, a decimal overlay over a sexagenary system that is so amazingly advanced that they were able to do advanced calculus in the ancient world, trigonometry. They were to do all kinds of things. How did they develop this for their mathematics, for their banking? Yes, they were bankers. For their banking in ancient Sumer, and for their trigonometry for their mariners, because we also have those cuneiform texts too, the star charts and the cuneiform that shows that ancient ship captains had to do advanced calculus in order to get from one place to another. But they just didn't know there was the year was 365 days. It is so dumb. It's dumb. Man, I need to do a song. Hey, bro, I know you listen to all my videos. This is the guy I'm working with. We need a song. It's so dumb. That's what we need. It's so dumb. Hi, Lacey. It's so dumb. That's good shit. I got to do that. All right. That'd be an awesome song. So, Velikovsky asserts that the stargazers of all these cultures so studiously watched the heavens and calculated the lengths of months, years, and seasons for centuries, and even millennia, would not know the year was 360 days? What? What? He shows that in just 6 years, there would be a whole month off in their timelines. Do you see how dumb the uniformitarian arguments are now? They're stupid. Velikovsky went straight to the heart of the matter. He says, you can't say they didn't know there wasn't a 365-day year. For 2,000 years, they had been meticulously mapping the stars, the star paths. Hell, they had it's called the three ways in the MUL.APIN, ancient Babylonian astronomy. They knew the exact dates of the heliacal rising of different stars in Egypt. They knew the heliacal rising of Sirius. They knew. And Velikovsky hits the nail on the head. In just 6 years, with precession, you would have noticed the difference. With 6 years of a 5.25 day differential between a 360 degrees of the celestial sphere and the actual year of 365.25 days, there's no way that after this period of 6 or 7 years, astronomers wouldn't be going, oh shit, we're off on all our calculations. There's no way. It would be a huge gap. So something must have happened in 713 BC to add those days to the calendar. So to add to this argument, the ancients developed complex day count systems and calendars, the Venus almanacs, decimal and sexagesimal systems. There is no way they did not know the year was 365 days. They added 5 days because something happened. There was a change in the motion of our world as shown in the sky. The relationship between the sun, the moon, and the terrasphere had been changed. It's that simple. Velikovsky relates that the added 5 days to the year in Egypt was not due to the progress in astronomical knowledge, but due to a change in the motion of the planets according to the Canopus decree of Egypt, which referred to the amendment of the faults of heaven. An ancient Egyptian text mentions there was a mistake that happened in the heavens, and they had to add 5 days. The Canopus decree mentions that at some time in the past, the year was 360 days. Confirming that something had gone wrong in the sky is the fact that these 5 days were dedicated to Osiris, Isis, Horus, Typhon, the phoenix, and Typhon's wife, Nephthys, which is actually a play on Typhon, being Ephon reversed. Yeah, Nephthys is Typhon in reverse. So, the added days in the Egyptian calendar were the sun, the moon, the son of the sun, Phoenix, and his consort, the reverse of Phoenix. Typhon was known as the destroyer, the enemy of the sun. You need to remember this. It's going to come up later. Typhon was acknowledged by the Egyptians as being the destroyer. So the ancient Egyptian text literally tells us that the year was changed and 5 days were added because something had to be, there was an amendment to the motion of the heavens. Something changed. And they dedicated the change to the destroyer. Ptolemy III of Egypt, in the decree of Canopus, inserted an extra day every 4 years, leap year, to keep the 365.25 day year in alignment with the seasons. The question remains, why did it take until this late date if the Egyptians had been meticulously record keeping since the 3rd millennium BC? It's a good question, because they're very sophisticated ancient Egyptian papyri that show their arithmetic and trigonometry was superior. So something as simple as not knowing that there were 5.25 days in the year, they missed it. They missed it. But if the sun and moon altered their courses in 713 BC, then we have our answer. There are no mentions. Get this, there are no mentions of 5 additional days added to the calendar in all the records of Egypt up through the 18th dynasty. From the 1st dynasty to the 18th dynasty, there are no references to the added 5.25 days. But in the starting of the 7th century BC and afterwards, the 5 intercalary days are added. In History of Antiquity, 1887, Professor Max Dunker wrote that the 3rd day of the 5 added to the calendar was to the Egyptian dedicated to the Almighty Destroyer, found on Egyptian papyri. There's another reference. The ancient Persian year was 360 days of 12 months of 30 days each. It was in the 7th century BC that the Gatha days were added to the calendar, or the bad luck days. In India, in the 7th century BC, there was a change in the calendar. Velikovsky shows that the Hindu texts relate that the change in length of year from 360 days to 365 was sometime in the 6th century BC. This is perfect, giving sufficient time to elapse to notice the change from the year 713. On the other side of the world, the ancient Mexicans called these added 5 days the Nemontemi, or useless days. The Native Americans of North America reported that the sun retarded its course by 80 hours. And in South America, they claimed that the moon once fell from the sky and then later repositioned itself. How does the sun go back 80 hours as the moon falls from the sky? How does that happen? Inca King Inticapac Yupanqui, after the disaster, ordered that a new calendar be instituted, new astronomical observations be made, changing the calendar from 360 to 365 days a year. You can't make this shit up. The data is everywhere. All right. Let's see. Next section. The world after 713 BC. Although the zodiac seems not yet known in 700 BC, 410 BC is the date of the earliest surviving personal horoscope. This is from Rupert Gleadow in The Origin of the Zodiac. The Alexandrian origin of the solar zodiac had the heavens divided into 36 decans. To the Egyptologist, the signs of the zodiac of Dendera are of foreign elements. The earliest zodiac in Egypt dates to about 200 BC at Esna. It merges the Greek Babylonian zodiacs, adding the ancient Egyptian concept of 36 decans of the celestial sphere, of which Sirius, the dog star, was the most prominent. So it's not that ancient Egyptians didn't have zodiacs, they were lunar, but they were totally different constellations. We are talking about the solar zodiac of Aries through Pisces, popular today. It wasn't developed till after 500 BC. It was an import into ancient Egypt. Concerning the zodiac of Dendera, Ezra Ivanov, in Ancient Origins of the Zodiac, wrote on page 14, the accuracy with which these celestial diagrams are rendered can be verified by computer analysis. In the famous round zodiac of Dendera, the only one of its kind discovered in Egypt, the planets are depicted at sunrise on April 17th, 17 AD. Ezra Ivanov in Ancient Origins of the Zodiac wrote that the Dendera zodiac has references for the decans calculating back to the year 700 BC. What a coincidence. Now, one of the zodiacal diagrams found in Egypt is as old as the 30th dynasty, which ended with Cleopatra. This is according to a scholar who is a specialist on the origin of the zodiac, Rupert Gleadow. This means that the zodiacs of Egypt were made when Hellenized Jews, Greeks, and Romans administered all the Egypt's affairs in the decades just prior to the rise of Christianity. The Dendera zodiac introduces a very non-Egyptian element, one that came straight from the Babylonian astronomy, in that it shows the 12 star configurations of the zodiacs with their planets in their signs of exaltation. The doctrine of exaltations is distinctly Babylonian and found its way into the Egyptian system in the Hellenistic period, about 200 BC, but it's traced to Babylonia, 700 BC. Rupert Gleadow, in The Origin of the Zodiac, wrote, no direct evidence has survived for the use of the zodiac in prediction before the 5th century, and in Egypt before the 3rd century BC. Now, since the MUL.APIN series dates to about 700 BC, this is Babylonian astronomy, and makes no mention of the zodiac, presumably it was not yet known, for it was not required, so long as the Babylonians were quite content with their lunar calendar. This is very important. The Babylonians were content for over 1,000 years with the lunar calendar, so there was no development, there was no necessity at all to modify what worked perfectly. The lunar calendar, the lunar zodiac, was ancient and it worked just fine. And it was by direct observation only. No calculations were necessary, like a solar zodiac requires. So the lunar calendar was a zodiac, and the deviation of the movement of the moon in 713 BC had the ancient world scrambling for a new system. In History of Antiquity, 1887, Professor Max Dunker wrote that the first indications in Babylonian text of their astronomers tracing the sun's path through the 12 constellations is the 7th century BC, or the 600s. Why? Why would you wait over 15 centuries to start doing this? Because there was never a need. They never needed to measure the sun for anything. The sun requires calculus. The moon is observation. because at nighttime you can see the moon pass through the houses of the deal. But on a solar calendar, you cannot. You measure every day. It's a diurnal system. Day and night is your standard of measurement. If you want to know where in the zodiac the sun is passing through, it's done by calculation, not observation, because you cannot see the stars. Godfrey Higgins in 1833, in his massive work Anacalypsis, wrote that the first astronomers were not calculators, but observers. The moon is seen in the zodiac, and her place is obvious to the eye of the most rude observer. The sun is not seen in it, and its place is only known by comparison and calculation. This is critical to understand that the lunar calendars and zodiacs were observation-based systems, and they failed. Something happened in the sky, and observation-based systems collapsed. So they opted to invent new systems that could be calculated without observation. The moon in 713 BC left the sky as observable from the hemisphere over Babylonia and Assyria. The Babylonians can't have that when it's the moon that tells them what time of the year, what time of the month it is. Rupert Gleadow, in The Origin of the Zodiac, concerning the first zodiacs, which were lunar, wrote, "The zodiac was not created in an endeavor to establish in heaven signs for supposedly superstitious purposes, but was simply an early attempt to create a calendar based on observation." He then proceeds to explain that the system was based off of the passage of the moon into each sign. It was very simple. This means zodiacs were originally lunar because the moon could be observed passing through the signs. Solar zodiacs are conceptual and not observed, but based on calculation. The priests were the sky watchers and keepers of the calendar. There is evidence of a collapse of order in Egypt from this event, that the people lost faith in their temples and government. It was at this time, 700 BC, that the Egyptian demotic of the people, demotic is of the people, script began to be widely in use, and the older hieratic of the priesthood began to decline. Isn't that interesting? If something is true, you're going to see it from multiple different vantage points. So after 713 BC, the people started doing their own homework, their own research, developed their own communication style. It was far more primitive. It's called demotic. It's demotic, but they didn't want to hear shit from the priests anymore. And hieratic fell into disuse. Amazing. It's amazing. It is coffee time. Love our coffee. The picture unfolds of a world relying for centuries on the stability of the moon as a guide, and calendars suddenly confronted with the moon disappearing from its station and changing the length of the year in their perception, and therefore being untrustworthy. The reversal of the sun's motion and the disappearance of the moon and its wandering for months can only be a pole shift. And this is precisely what we find censored from the public. Guys, if there's any takeaway from this video, you need to pay attention. I'm always telling you and providing you evidence that the scientific community is suppressing a massive amount of data so you don't find it. I'm going to give you absolute evidence of this right now. Research published in 1949 shows that scientist G. Fulgeriter discovered on Attic and Etruscan, that's Greek, Attic and Etruscan art, that the magnetic polarity of Earth changed in the 8th century BC. This is in Velikovsky's Ages and Chaos, Volume 2, page 247. The discovery was published in Science News by Penguin, referencing the work of Fulgeriter at the turn of the century. When I came across this data, I had to go find some more material about it, and I was shocked about how the internet had been scrubbed. I'm going to show you. But I ended up finding another paper, not a book, but a research paper published by Emanuel Velikovsky that addresses the topic. Velikovsky again mentioned in his paper the pitfalls of radiocarbon dating, where he notes that magnetic reversals weaken the magnetosphere, allowing more cosmic rays through the atmosphere, which alters the results of radiocarbon readings. In fact, the scientific community has suppressed the discovery of this reversal in the 8th century BC. This is a magnetic reversal because admitting it occurred means that the thousands of relative dating procedures conducted to produce ages for samples published all over the world would be in error to some degree, some being grossly in error. An online search revealed that the research had formerly been available online, but it is now 404 not found. Let me show you. Any of you can do this yourself. I looked up this guy's name, and look what Google's tagline was when it pulled up. Magnetic poles reversed. Most interesting is the discovery that the last time the reversal of the magnetic field took place was in the 8th century before the present era, or 27 centuries ago. When you click onto any of these things down here or any of these images, it pops up 404 not found. So somebody has determined that you are not to know this data. Although I preserved it in Emanuel Velikovsky's material, but I had to find an online paper that talked about it. And I had to read, I wasn't even reading for Emanuel Velikovsky's stuff. I was reading, trying to put together an Archaix Academy file for the bullshit that is carbon-14 dating invented by William Libby. I have a whole bunch of examples of carbon-14 being total bullshit. And when I was going through it, I found Velikovsky's paper tucked in there, and he was talking about how the scientific community was suppressing this research because they don't want to undo thousands and thousands of carbon-14 dates that have already been found in encyclopedias and in books and all that stuff like that. You are being lied to. So it's 404 not found. It's just so crazy. Just absolutely so crazy. So what we have here, I know what this is. I know what this is. I got other things to share, but I need to do them in their order. And it's not time yet to show those things. So let's go back to this document. So you have now seen direct evidence that the scientific community is aware that there was a magnetic reversal in the 8th century, which is the 700s BC. They don't want to rewrite the science books. A magnetic reversal alters almost every radiomagnetic output dating, procedure out there. From potassium argon, all the relative dating methods, which are bullshit anyway. We've talked about them before. They're all completely arbitrary. They get to cherry pick which samples that they want to publish and which ones they want to suppress. Emanuel Velikovsky talked about that a lot. He says it's not even fair for it's not even fair what you guys are doing. How the hell are you going to take 200 samples and send them to 5 or 6 different labs and then pick the 11 that actually support what you're saying, and then because 4 of the labs all give you the 11 that you want, you can make it look like labs all over the world comport that, yes, this date was right here, but you eliminated 50 samples in order to tell the public that you nailed the date. Yeah, they get to do this. They get to practice exclusions. Why? Because they're uniformitarians. They're hypocrites. That's why they get to do it. So this guy discovered the deal, and you have now seen evidence. You can look it up yourself. When I clicked onto everything there, it's 404 not found, 404 not found. Somebody has scrubbed the internet of this 8th century, because at one time it was on Google. At one time you could look up all this research about basically a magnetic reversal, a pole shift in the 8th century. You can't look it up now. So, what do we have here? What have we reviewed? Oh, we're far from done. But what have we reviewed? The year changed to 365 days. The moon was no longer trusted. Lunar calendars fell into disuse. Solar calendars were created from lunar zodiacs. A new world age began. Polaris became the new pole star. Precession began with the new sun and moon dynamic. Very important for you to understand that. Precession is the wobble created from a relationship with Earth, the sun, and the moon. But in 713 BC, the sun and the moon changed that relationship. And all of a sudden, the effect is a wobble. That wobble was never noticed anywhere in the ancient world prior to this event. Now we have a wobble. This wobble is precession. It began at this date. Solar zodiacs slowly developed over centuries. It wasn't fast. A minor pole shift, a geomagnetic reversal. And straight out of the historical record, we have Herodotus asking the Egyptians about the time when the sun deviated from its course. This is what the Egyptians told Herodotus. They assured me that Egypt was quite unaffected by this. The harvest and the produce of the river were the same as usual, and there was no change in the incidence of disease or death. This quote is dated 2,450 years ago. The Egyptians admitted they did not trust the sun. They admitted the sun had been playing false across the sky. But it didn't change their world. Everything kept on trucking. This cannot be overstated. The sun and the moon changed their positions in the sky, and the Egyptians noted that this did not cause destruction in their world. In Archaix, we have documented from the historical record that the sun has behaved like a local phenomenon many times, and that history is packed with references to solaric anomalies that only affected local destructions. The uniformitarian model cannot process this data and dismisses the entire historical record because it collapses the scientific model of a sun being 93 million miles away.